Okay, I know some of us are still finding our seats, but let me go ahead and call our meeting to order. We'll start with roll call.
Burt.
Here.
Espinoza.
Here.
Coleman. Here. Klein.
Here.
Price. Here. Sharp.
Here.
Schmidt.
Here.
Shepherd. Here. Yay.
Here.
9 present. Now the Library Commission, please excuse me if I don't pronounce your name right. Tolupe.
Yes.
Bachtian.
Yes.
Hochberg. Landauer.
Here.
Moss.
Here.
Palanapian.
Here.
Sorry. Train.
Here.
So we have 6 present.
Thank you. Well, first of all, welcome everyone to the first full meeting of 2012. I think it's always just a great way to start off actually by having a meeting with our boards and commissions. I know council enjoys the opportunity to just hear about the work that the Library Commission has done, and then also to hear what you have planned for the upcoming year. So with that, I know that the commission has put together its own presentation, and let me go ahead and turn it over to, I think, just the chair.
Thank you. So, my name's Devane. I'm going to cover some of this material. I was going to be able to say we have a full commission here. Leo's not here yet, but now we have 7 people on our commission, which is great. So Noel is our new addition, and we're up to 7, which is a wonderful way to start the year. What I'm going to try to cover is a brief sort of status of the library and the library construction project, and then some of the stuff that we've been working on as a commission last year, so some of the things that we decided to focus on. And we're going to actually have all the commissioners talk a little bit so you can hear from all of them, not just me. And then we're going to end by going into the art connector, just because that's an open issue right now, and that's going to come before the council soon. And then, do I need to use that? Okay.
The microphone
Sorry.
doesn't project, but it's
Okay.
used for taping purposes.
And then we will end by talking about our 2012 sort of first look at our priorities. And we're going to try to run through this in 20 to 25 minutes so we have enough time for discussion at the end. So that's kind of how we've set it up. So I'm going to launch into it so we can meet our 25 minute limit. Evelyn, we can just go to the next one. Okay, so this is kind of where we are, and I'm guessing most of you already know where we are in the presentation. The couple of things I just one, so downtown opened in 2011, as all of you know, so that was a really exciting time for everyone. And then the January 2012, the hours at downtown were expanded. So again, very exciting for the community. We have new library, new hours there as well. So that's kind of new stuff that's very exciting. With that, I'm going to move on to the next page, Evelyn. I put in a couple of pictures. Just again, I'm sure all of you are aware of this, but thought it was kind of fun just to show a couple of pictures. The first two there are the downtown opening, really well attended. The library looks great, and you can see the little children's area there. So again, 2011 was a great year for the libraries. And then there's a picture there on Mitchell Park construction. Again, I know a number of you have already seen it, but just thought it would be a nice thing to throw in here so you can see kind of where the library is. And this is probably dated a little bit. It's probably at least a month or two old, so lots happened since the picture you see there. The next page. So now that the downtown library is open, there's a lot of really cool events happening there, and I picked 3 pictures just to give you a sense of the diversity of what's going on there. So that first one, the Twilight program targeted at teens, and the Real Housewives of Palo Alto targeted at housewives. And then the Reliving Game 5. There's lots of kids there. So again, they're doing really wonderful things. It's been a really fun year for the libraries this year. We've been able to do a lot more than in the past. And I really want to thank Monique and all the staff for just the wonderful job they've done serving the community. The last piece that I want to cover is performance statistics. Just want to throw out some numbers. Again, everyone's very familiar with the libraries, but just to show you how well used our libraries are. In fiscal year 2011, 777,000 customer visits. So there's a lot of customers, a lot of patrons going into these libraries, very well used. 1.5 million items checked out. So again, really good usage. And this is in spite of, downtown being closed for part of it and just sort of the Mitchell Park move. And still, the libraries are really well used. So with that, I want to move into some of the things that the LAC focused on in 2011. And we have 3 things we want to talk about: the virtual library, the teen focus, and the dashboard. And so, Tolo, I'm going to turn it over to you for the virtual library.
Okay, thank you very much, Devani. So I'm Tula Kinola, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Commission. And one of the areas, as Devani just mentioned, is the virtual library. And what this is, we've kind of looked at what we've done in terms of construction projects. We've created a lot of space and facilities, and even more are going to come online over the next couple months, the next 18 months or so. And we want to focus on ways in which we can generate utilization of these facilities and really let as many people in the community know that the libraries are open for everyone in Palo Alto to come out and use. And one of the big initiatives we think about is the virtual library. And the idea is to create a branch, essentially a branch online, where people can not only transact with the library in terms of having material on hold and checking things out and knowing, whether you're going to pay your fines or not, but also a place where we can engage with the library staff, engage with each other, and really find an opportunity for community online as well that the library can facilitate. And the goals of this is really to help drive utilization of these great new facilities that we've created, that we've built and we've spent a tremendous amount of money on, and to make sure that we are creating as much efficiency in terms of the transactions and having that sense of connection with the library itself. So we've spent the last couple ending months of 2011 talking to various stakeholders across from the city staff, the library staff, and the commissions, and some of the other the web commissions that the city has. And we're going to move towards, for 2012, to focus on really helping to prototype this, develop a staffing plan, help to think about ways in which you can fund this, and really make this come alive this year.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Eileen.
They have a microphone.
Oh, I've got one. Super. And I don't have to. Super. Okay, so for mine, as we looked at the library, what was being done and what wasn't being done, there seemed to be a bit of a hole with regard to the teens where there weren't any particular programs being offered. So we decided that would become a priority, and luckily both Downtown opened and Monique came on board right about the same time as we picked teens. And they've done just a fabulous job of taking this and running with it. With three primary areas of focus. They've really emphasized academic literacy and recreational. And I'm going to highlight just a few of the many programs that they've had because they've done just a terrific job. But on the academics, the college series is where they take the kids that are writing their paper. They've had 3 sessions and up to 50 kids in these individual classes, very interactive, raising their hands, talking, asking lots of questions. There's a science program that they do, just again, very interactive, and they bring kids in. As an example, there was a Big Bang program, had over 70 participants. These kids were very, very active, staying way late after the program, asking questions, asking more. There will be a homework assistance program, a pilot program that starts next month. It's in partnership with Think Tank Learning. If it works well, there will be expansion plans of that. If we go to the literacy, and again, I'm just picking a few of the great things that have been done this last year. They're the pizza and books that we showed, the Breaking Dawn movie up here, but there have been quite a few of those. There's a new program that starts next month, and it's called Book Buddies. And what this will be is where they take the teenagers and train them to be formal literacy tutors and then partner them with the kids in the elementary school. So if we look at the developmental assets, you can get empowerment, you can get service, you can get positive image. It just has so many different elements in that, the developmental assets that will be hit. So this is, again, something that is starting. The teens will be first trained, and then it'll roll out where they have their kids to work with. Dropping, again, to recreational, each one of these, there are a lot of things. I'm only telling you about the big highlights. For recreational, one of the things they did was called Knack for Knitting, and it was done just because somebody loved knitting. And what this has become is very interactive, intergenerational things. So it started with knitting, but because teens learn very fast and they're curious, they've learned how to knit, and now they go around to the other tables and teach people how to cast off, how to catch, how to correct loops. But it's in between the generations, and again, the teens are getting very involved and very excited. And a program that was intended to leave, they've actually begged, can you keep it going? So that will continue every month. The recreational, again, there's going to be a teen lounge environment to get the kids playing games and interacting. So just dropping off of that, as we've asked them to get involved in youth program, the library staff felt that they shouldn't spread themselves too thin and try to be everything to everybody, that they had to focus and do something they felt they could contribute to. So they picked 3 initiatives, the Safety Net, the Drug and Alcohol Collaborative, and the Youth Collaborative. And I have to say, working with these people and talking to them, the amount of energy, enthusiasm, ideas in the pipeline, it's just this group has really stepped up from a non-existent program to just being absolutely on fire. And I'd like to thank Monique and all of the staff. They've done really a fabulous job with regard to teens.
And I am speaking to our second priority, which is a dashboard of metrics so that we can better understand the library, and also it showcases what the very talented library staff does and has done. In starting this, we learned that the library collects a lot of statistics externally with its relations with its customers, and internally as far as measuring staff work, staff effectiveness. I'm just going to read the currently available statistics, and there are 8 different kinds that we have looked at, and I'll just read them off to you really quickly. The How the Library Served You annual report that's posted on the website, the internal measurements of the public services librarians' activities. Those would be the librarians who give programs, who answer questions, who write the e-newsletter, visit teachers, make up some of the programs that Elaine just talked about. And they do measure their various activities. And furthermore, they have developed quite a few forms to measure many things, like the evaluation, satisfaction surveys for training, adult and children's programs, class visits, the Library Home Connection. That is a program of volunteers going out to visit people who are homebound, bringing them books because they can't get into the library. And they are surveyed every year, and that is tracked. Youth services, and of course we will be following that more with the teen priority. The community assessment report for the competitive statewide Boomer Volunteer Grant, which was called Transforming Life After 50, Public Libraries and Baby Boomers. This was a highly competitive grant, and Palo Alto was one of the few cities that received that grant. Of course, we are tasked with reviewing the library, the LSMAR, the Library Measurement of Service Report for the bond issue, and the survey that we conducted last year. So with this, all of this data, we are really reviewing what additional metrics, if any, should be on the dashboard, and then establish a quarterly tracking system so that we can monitor and be more efficient and more effective in our work.
One of the items that you're going to be discussing next month, and I'm sure it's going to have a lot of people coming down to talk about it, is the connector between the 2 parking lots at the Arts Center and at the library. We got a lot of comments at the Library Commission meetings about this because it may impact the area right behind main library where we have all of the gardens. And if you're familiar with garden people, they get really upset if they think there's any potential impacts on that area. So let me go back a little bit. One of the things we looked at when we considered the renovation to Main was that Main and the Art Center were kind of disconnected. And so we looked at ways to make them more connected and more compatible. And one of the things that is going to be done is the access road that comes off of Newell back along the Art Center, between the Art Center and Main Library, instead of being a straight road that a lot of people right now use as a cut-through from Embarcadero to Newell, it's going to be curved, and it's going to go with, there's going to be parking there. So we think that's going to significantly reduce the cut-through and especially the speeding. The second thing is we wanted more parking spaces. So the area, which right now has these sheds, a little parking area, is going to be renovated. The sheds will be taken down as we make parking. And then the idea is to put an area, a road, I shouldn't call it a road, call it a drivable pathway between that parking lot and the main parking lot on the other side of Main Library, so that when there's overflow at the Art Center for events, people won't have to go out onto Newell, drive down Newell, go back in again, which we found was problematic. There's a lot of students in particular that go up and down Newell, biking and walking, and we didn't want to interfere with them. We also thought that since we're trying to tie the Art Center and the library together, make a connection between the two parking lots would just logically do more of that. The idea is that the pathway is going to be like cobblestoned and narrow, only about 20 feet wide, so that it will prevent people from speeding. People won't be comfortable driving more than maybe 15 miles an hour along that pathway. There is an existing path that people don't know about if you're not back there. There's an unpaved trail, basically, that's used between the two parking lots right now by trucks and service vehicles. That will be closed off, and the service vehicles will use a new driveway. The net result is going to increase the amount of space in the garden by about 180 to 200 square feet. It will cause some problems because we're doing some reshuffling of some of the area that's there now. Some of the area which is now planted will go into the driveway, and an area which is in the old path will become plantable. One of the caveats we had is we had a lot of people saying, well, if you have a driveway there, people are just going to go speeding back and forth. They're going to use that as a way to get over to Newell. If there are any problems, and we only think that driveway will be used once or twice a week when the parking lots are really full, but we put a caveat in, if we do in fact have traffic problems or any kind of safety problems, then that driveway will be narrowed and become a very narrow bike and pedestrian path. And nobody associated with the gardens is objecting to a pedestrian bike area, path in that area. So that will be a fallback position if we're wrong, we do have a problem. But unfortunately, we don't have a picture of what the driveway looks like. The current configuration takes out about 3 parking spaces. And I'll take out 2 trees, and I talked to the arborist, and Mr. Doctor said those trees are pretty sick, and they would have to be taken out anyway. They're dying. If we didn't want to take out any parking spaces, there's a 3rd tree which is healthy, which could be taken out and change the configuration of the driveway. We're not recommending it. We don't like to take trees out of Palo Alto. But if you really need 3 extra parking spaces, that option is available. So, any other questions?
I think we can take the questions after the whole presentation is over. We're almost done anyway. So just kind of to summarize what you all just heard, for 2012, there's 3 main areas that we're looking to, we've sort of emphasized because there are things that we believe that will be significant going forward towards the achievements of what the library can do. And there are also areas that we feel that there might be opportunities to come before you and bring issues where we think that the council, would need to think about and perhaps make a decision or two. So going back on the virtual library, which we've brought up because we think this is going to be an important driver towards making sure the community at large understands the services of the library that are available, making sure that we very efficiently expose all the things that the library can do for each and every citizen in Palo Alto. The emphasis on teens, because this is one of the core, this is part of the core of the mission of the library, and it's also very timely in terms of where Palo Alto is right now and the areas that we need to focus on, and also on the development of actionable metrics, because we think it's important that we can actually look at what the library is doing, each and every aspect about how the library is serving the community, and be able to tie it to numbers and really say whether we're doing better, we're doing worse, and how we're trending over time. So that this is something that we can have accountability towards the entire Palo Alto of what we're doing. So these are the three main areas that we'll be focusing on. And of course, the building projects continue throughout the year. And, we look forward to having, some of the new libraries open, and it's really exciting as we go out and see the progress that's going on. And I'm sure you guys get to put on your hard hats every once in a while and trudge out there and see it. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the openings of the libraries. And of course, long-range budget management remains something that we all want to keep an eye on and make sure is on the radar for all of us. So, Devani, do you have anything to close with?
Yep. Close with that and then open it out for
If there are any questions or any discussion points you would like to bring up, I'll be happy to have that.
Thank you very much. I think it's just a great presentation. We do have an opportunity for council to just ask any questions about any of the, yes, Councilmember Shepherd.
Thank you. First off, I thank you so much for this. Is a great presentation, and I'm loving the way that you guys are loving our libraries. So, so I just want to give you accolades to that. I know the virtual aspect of the library is very exciting. I got to use a couple of the virtual libraries up at San Francisco State where you can actually look and see, on the bookshelves what's next to the book that you might want to check out. And so there's a lot of virtual options that are coming in that actually just kind of move you into wanting to go to the library anyway, which I think is really where libraries are. They're community gathering spots, and I think Mitchell Park will really feature that well when that opens. I really hope that the homework assistance program works well, because I know that would have been just a wonderful asset for me with my kids when they were going through, to be with other kids that needed a little bit of help and learn how to ask the right questions and how to get the objectives of their homework done. I think that that's really a great responsibility for kids to learn at a young age. And finally, the way that you have incorporated youth into some of the questions you're asking and some of the answers you're finding, to build program is just, it really champions the council priority for collaboration with youth and well-being. I did notice that you put on your punch list of things the drug and alcohol collaboration, which I think the school district has not. I think that they don't have that committee anymore. But if the library wants to bring it back up, I know Becky Beacom over at the Palo Medical Foundation would be able to help you with that, because I think that was something that people wanted to keep going as parents. And then finally, I have asked staff, and I wanted to know a little bit more about, I guess, the library configuration between the Art Center and the library will be coming to staff, to council pretty soon. I think this month even, right? February. I would like to understand, and I will be doing my own work in the comprehensive plan, what the purpose of the gardens are, and the highest and best use of public lands and that type of thing. Because I think that this is, one of the final times that we actually get to look at that configuration, since it's a major renovation of the main library and the art center at the same time. But thank you so much for your work. This is wonderful.
Councilmember Price.
Thank you. This was a great presentation. There's so many exciting things going on. A couple of comments and a couple of questions. With the all the efforts related to youth and youth collaboration, with various programs, have you ever had a joint meeting with the Youth Council or invited them to engage with you in discussion? To what degree have you specifically asked the youth of our community to critique, to come up with suggestions? I mean, what are the ways in which you've done that?
Microphone.
Is this the last year for the microphone?
Yay. Hi, I'm Monique Laconge. I'm the library director. So in terms of the building plans, focus groups were done with teen groups specifically. So in terms of planning facilities and facility use, we also have a young adult group that has been meeting at different libraries, and we will get them involved. But the joint meeting or inviting them to come to an LAC meeting, I think, is a great idea and something we could definitely, implement, extend an invitation. So, but we do have regular ways of reaching that target audience.
Great, because I know you've done some of that, but I wanted to take this opportunity to try to highlight that. The other thing is certainly the obvious PTA Council and PAUSD. I know you've had a lot of communication with them, but the PTA Council newsletter, the group called Parents of Students of Color. I mean, there are lots of different groups that are different configurations, different folks within the community. Hispanic Parent Ed programs. There are a lot of ways in which kind of reaching in that way makes it possible to diversify your engagement, which I think is exciting. The other quick question is on the ebooks. You talk here in the virtual library about prototypes and opportunities. What is the utilization generally at this moment in terms of ebooks?
You want specific numbers of how many people are checking them out?
Whatever you think would be the most informative.
The use over last year has gone up dramatically. We recently purchased 2,000 new copies of ebooks, and I know Bob Moss came up to me last week and said, "I have a complaint," with a nice smile. My wife went on to download some ebooks, and everything she wanted was checked out. So I said, well, we have ordered 2,000 more copies. So we're part of a larger consortium, and we're looking at ways to continually add more and make it more available. The biggest complaint that I've heard since starting here in May has been, I have to wait too long. I want, I would like more. And the fact that the business end of that, working with publishers, they have changed, sometimes even daily. For a while, Penguin said, we're not going to release any more ebooks. Then the next day they said, okay, we will, but only for things that are currently, for us to keep track of what different publishers are doing takes up a fair amount of staff time, actually. So we continue to look for ways to add more resources and expand that, because it is of great interest. We're looking at actually checking out e-readers themselves so that people could experiment with, I could take home a Nook, I could take home a Kindle, I could try a Sony e-reader, I could try different brands and test drive them before I purchase one. And we do offer training. So if people need help with theirs, we either have it online, we direct them to help, or we can help them in the library themselves. So we're doing a great job. We're working hard on it. Yeah, it's a hard animal to keep track of.
Let me elaborate on it a little. I bought my wife a Kindle Fire a couple of months ago, which she loves. And she has two problems with it. One of them is the library website, which is not just a libraries, it's an area website, is awkward to use. She can download books, but it's not easy. The second problem is, as Monique mentioned, she went online to download a book, and she's number 34 in line. But it's not just a Palo Alto library. This is a wider area that's got it backed up. So while she reads the e-books, she hasn't given up on the paperbacks. She still reads 4 or 5 a week. The publishers have been weird. One publisher said, well, I'll sell ebooks, but they expire after 26 checkouts. 3 other publishers said, we will not sell ebooks to libraries, period. Then they came back and they said, well, maybe we will, but under certain circumstances. And as Monique said, it changes almost weekly. So all I can say is that there's an interest in people having ebooks, but the industry isn't settled down yet. And you probably read letters to the council saying that ebooks are going to wipe out the libraries. You're not going to have a real library, physical library anymore. Everything's going on online. Ain't going to happen. People will still be reading paper books. But my guess is that the ebook situation is not going to be resolved for libraries in the near future. It'll be at least 4 to 6 months before it really shakes out.
I think it's great to start the new year with the library as the first order of business. It's the year of the library. We're looking forward to a lot of excitement in the community from the libraries. Let me talk just a little bit about the priorities you've set for the year. You know, we're in the midst of expanding our library space and making libraries available in every part of town. But we're also in the midst of Silicon Valley, where information is available everywhere. People can take it with them wherever they go. So, you know, one of your jobs as a library commissioner is to deal with that dilemma. What do we do with this new space that people are using information sources everywhere? I think some of the things you've identified to work on are fantastic. First of all, metrics. People use libraries for different things than even 5 years ago, certainly 10 or 15 years ago. One of the interesting things about in this information age is libraries are still filled. People go there. You know, what are they doing when they're there? How do you measure what they do, what they get out of the library? It's no longer just checking out a book, which they can do online, but it's other activities take place when they come there. So I think to try and identify how you measure the value of the library in the community is an important thing. I think the virtual branch notion is just a great idea, because what you're doing is you're saying there's many different entry points to the library, and you should start before you go there. After you leave there, you're still connected to the library. And to build a virtual library, I think would help the transformation of people thinking about a library as a place to go, and that's where information is, to that's where information is facilitated. You know, if you could help share with the community, what is it people are using and getting, what kinds of information they're using. I think the virtual library notion is a great way of doing that. Just one other comment on the teens. I remember when I was on the school board, the single most interesting data point that I still carry around and shock with me is by the 8th grade, there are 10 grade levels in reading skills between the top 10% and the bottom 10%. Now, in a way, that would indicate that, you know, by the 8th grade, the game is played. And, you know, working with teens is good and important and valuable. But I think of the kids between 6 and 12 who no longer fit in the kids' corner of the library, and yet they're not actively engaged in teen solo activities. So, you know, there's a group in there of kids between 6 and 12 that, you know, I think are opening themselves to the world, and the library can be important parts. I just hope they don't get lost in look forward to the activities during the year.
Councilmember Espinoza.
Well, thank you first for your service. I know you guys put in a lot of hours. Thank you for that work. I think these are good priorities. I was hoping to just hear some comments about a few other areas. One was, one of the things that always strikes me, especially about the Library Commission and the work of the libraries, is how much people don't know about everything that goes on. And I know we've talked about that in the past. It strikes me every time we interview commissioners, especially for the Library Commission, people, what would you want to see happen? And people list a whole bunch of things that I see the library staff always during these interviews say, oh, yeah, we already have that. We should have a book club, that we should have more kids programming, we should, the list goes on, we should have partnerships with the Art Center, author speaker series, and oh yeah, we're doing all those things already. And so it always strikes me that this is an area where a real focus on, and I know there's so much work that's done by the library staff already, but just wondering if you guys have had conversations or if there's any thinking about how to get additional outreach to segments of the community, to folks who just don't know how, everything that's going on.
I can take this one. Actually, the subcommittee that was started that ended up becoming the virtual branch subcommittee, our task was, I think it was outreach. But we realized that the real issue with outreach wasn't, a lot of it had to do with not having one place where you could find this information and having, for example, the activity calendar of the library is in one place, and the way to sign up for it is if you have a upcoming activity, you sign up in this one place. To find out what e-resources are available, it's one website, and to go through the catalog, it's another website. And we use the term virtual branch to kind of signify unifying a lot of these resources, and not only physical resources or virtual resources, but actually events and activities and services that the library provides. So that the idea is to encompass all of these in one place, which is the virtual branch. And they're also calling it the virtual branch, we felt like puts it a step higher, or a higher expectation than just a redesign of the current website, which is sort of happening right now. We felt that it needs to reach for something, a higher goal.
Well, that ties to the second question that I wanted, and it's maybe a question for Monique more than the commission. I'm not sure how that work has been delineated, but I know that we'll be coming, as a council, reviewing the citywide new website rollout in the coming months. And I'm wondering where that works in the timing in terms of the work that's being done to roll this out. Are we that roll? I know we roll out that broader plan, and then it rolls out to departments after that. And I just wonder how the work that we've been talking about today fits into the broader plan. Have you guys met with the website committee? Where's that connection and collaboration?
You want me to go?
Go ahead.
You want to go? I'll go first from the library's point of view. So we're actually we're looking at creating a staff task force who can focus on this for a very short, intense point of time to identify what it is that the LAC is most interested in us achieving. Our website redesign initially will follow along with the rest of the cities, and then this will be debuted separately from that, but it is a part of it. So we've had people working separately on this. They've met with the website committee. You guys have met with the website committee. So we've met with the city manager. So we've been keeping everybody involved in the loop and discussing sort of what the goal of that site is. And so we're working in concert with them.
If I just might add to that, Jim Keene, city manager, we actually have one of the final website advisory committee meetings tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The plan right now is for the new website rollout to take place on March 1st. We're talking about kind of going through a little beta period where it's live, and we can take a lot of public feedback and make some adaptations, but that's the target, and there's been a lot of work that's been done on the sub-site for the libraries, since they, again, just given this discussion, have some particular needs and that sort of thing. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Councilmember Klein.
One comment, one small question, one larger question. Comment, I just read a couple of days ago that on the ebook issue, that I think much to the surprise of most everybody, the price of ebooks has gone up significantly, and they're now higher than the comparable, in many cases, than the comparable old-fashioned print edition. So I don't know what to make of that, but it was intriguing for me, since I think everybody assumed that the ebook price was going to be continually a lot lower than the bound editions. Are we keeping, I'm sure we are, data as to the use of the new downtown? I'm in there at least once or twice a month. It seems to me that its use is significantly greater than the old one, but hopefully we have some data.
Yes, we have both a door count to count the number of visitors and the use of, how many people will sign on to use the public access computers, and circulation rates for all different kinds of media. And just to get back to your comment about the price of ebooks, libraries have never paid the same price as consumers anyway. Our price has always been generally between $30 and $60 per book. Because of the business model, they know that so many people are going to be borrowing it from the library, so that they changed that model. And a number of people have asked, well, can we buy it and then donate it to the library? And it doesn't work quite that way. So just to fill you in on that.
I'm concerned that we need to have a lot more discussion about the staffing of the new Mitchell Park Library. It's due to open in our 12-13 fiscal year. And when we went through the bond issue, we had estimates as to the number of new positions that would be needed, but that was then. Now we're here, and I'm just wondering what our timetable is to really think that through, what the role of the LIC is going to be in that. Anyway, where are we on that?
In the budget planning standpoint, we are looking at what the additional costs will be for opening it and are including that into our recommendation. However, the initial plan and the plan as it goes forward is when Mitchell Park closes, or when Mitchell Park opens, the main library will be closed. And so some of the staff, for at least the first year or so while we're working on the main renovation, they will be reassigned to Mitchell Park. And we'll be able to help out. So we've got another year on to look at that impact. And we're implementing new services or new technologies like the automated materials handling. So we're not quite sure what that's going to mean. It will definitely change the workflow, and we can look at, are there ways to create greater efficiencies and utilize staff more effectively. The other thing is that, as you've noticed at downtown, every seat seems to be filled every day when I walk around. So we can expect similar types of use at Mitchell Park. So we'll see how that works out, but we have a little time for that discussion.
One more incendiary question, very, very competitive. Any thought to renaming Maine?
I think the LIC can bring that up for discussion.
Thank you. Councilmember Burt.
Well, my colleagues have raised a number of interesting questions, and you have brought forward a whole bunch of great ideas and thoughts. One that's kind of emerging in my mind is we're talking about this grand new set of tools that we have in the libraries that are coming before us. There's suddenly new challenges and new opportunities to how do we really take full advantage of them, and the things that you've been talking about with Councilmember Price, talking about various community groups, and then Councilmember Espinoza on the ways in which you're using your virtual library. I have a couple of follow-up questions on that. With your new webpage, in addition to it being a center, are you looking at ways that it's going to move out and be linked and promoted on a lot of other sites? So that in the school systems, that each school necessarily thinks to go to the city library website as part of what they do day in and day out. And then not just the public schools, and this goes to also even the other groups. We have a lot of schools in our community that aren't public, but the libraries are for everyone. And we often kind of overlook a lot of these foreign language schools or other private schools, and I would like to encourage that we figure out real strong ways to engage there. Also with the teen council, we actually now in essence have 3 different ones. We have our traditional teen council, but the media center has their own teen council, and they have a whole bunch of skill sets that might be very complementary, and ways to both leverage their skills and leverage the media center, and at the same time really engage them and give them fulfillment. And then we have a teen arts council too, so there's really 3 of them that are functioning in the community. Which, with all this going on, it's making me think, libraries just in itself, libraries are not antiquated, but the term may be. And I just kept thinking that what you're describing here is about learning centers more than the way we've always, we have libraries and we think books in traditional ways, but things that go on there. But it seems to be morphing in a very positive way, changing. But that seems to be more descriptive of what's going on there. And then finally on this, I'm just waiting, hearing about the e-books and the complaints of, oh, they don't work because of that, or the other thing, they're too much in demand, you can't get them, and that's, it reminds me of the Yogi Berra line that is, nobody ever goes there anymore, it's too crowded. So I'm bracing for that one.
Vice Mayor Sharp.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your service. I'm sort of interested in following up a little bit on the e-reader concept. It seems very complicated and disruptive, and I guess what I'm thinking about is how much staff time we're spending on tracking it, what metrics we have. I would assume a lot of teens use e-readers. My kids do, but I mean, that may not be correct. I was sort of wondering if at some point we could sort of get an informational report on how this all works and how you're thinking about it and how you're thinking of rolling out. I was wondering, is the Library Advisory Commission looking at metrics on e-readers as part of their studies, and what is all your engagement in e-readers and the thoughts about how that works and how much resources we put in e-readers versus traditional books, and where we're going with that and what we project this out to be, and all of those thoughts.
So I will say that the e-readers comes up very frequently in our meeting, just e-books and kind of are we keeping up with it. One of the things that we're looking at in the dashboard is really what metrics can we collect to understand where we are today, and then from there kind of figure out where we need to. I think, there are some basic metrics out there, but I think we need a little bit more detail, and that's what we're trying to define right now so we can figure out kind of where we may have holes, where we may be doing really well. So there's a lot more that we need to know before we decide kind of where do we go from here.
So some of the questions that come to my mind is, if you buy a traditional book, how long does that last, and how long is it in circulation where people are actually using it, and does it fall off, and at some point really it's as if you didn't really have it? Because I gather with an e-reader, right, it's 26 times or 30 times or whatever that particular publisher says. So how does the cost of a traditional book compare to the cost of an e-reader, an e-book, compared to the cost of how many people are using that? I mean, this all actually seems fairly complicated. And then I gathered, I haven't done it, I can just go to the website and download to my e-reader a book as soon as it becomes available, and you get online and in line for it. Is that pretty much how it works?
So we did a presentation about ebooks to the LAC in October, I think, and I think it might be a worthwhile study session for the council. Yes, we have an online. Our current vendor is Overdrive, so we have a website that you go to, and depending on which kind of e-reader you use, or if you just want to download the EPUB version, there are different ways to show you how to do that. And that's, I think, what Bob meant by it being clunky. It's not streamlined. It's not easy. We can certainly do the analysis. Some books don't expire after 26 holds or 26 uses. And we do try to focus on those publishers that don't do that in terms of our purchasing. Plus, we're part of a larger consortium that is throughout Northern California. So we do leverage the available resources as much as possible, sharing with many other libraries, and then purchasing additional copies for Palo Alto residents only. So we're looking at ways to, libraries are very frugal, so we look for ways to leverage that money. The teens who use e-readers, I think they're probably a smaller percentage of the people who actually need help, because most teens are pretty tech savvy and able to help us actually figure things out. We have one or two staff who don't do this full time, but who monitor what's going on. It's an interest of theirs. It's where their energies are focused in terms of the library. And so there's a variety. And the purchasing of e-readers, we did that with not general fund monies, but some technology fund monies that the library had as part of the consortium. So we're looking at ways that we can maximize grants, other alternative funding sources to make those possible. Does that answer the question? Yeah, but I think it's a good idea to create these metrics. Right now we're tracking the number of circulations and the number of basic use.
So I don't know if we need a full study session on this, so you have the group, but an informational report, if you've already done it, would be really helpful. So at least there's some background concept of how all this works.
She showed it live though, which was I think kind of helpful for a lot of people. So we'll figure out a way to work that out.
To give you a little more information, a regular book, I've seen books on the shelf that are 10, 15 years old that maybe they don't get circulated a lot. There are some books which are extremely popular because they're number one on the popular New York Times list. And they'll go out 40 or 50 times in a matter of a few months. So it varies quite a bit depending on the popularity of the book. On the e-books, when you download an e-book, there is supposed to be a little thing you can click on that says you wanted to check it out for 7, 14, or 21 days. Now, the last one my wife checked out from the library, they don't let her check out for 7 days. Big list of people behind her. At the end of 7 days, it disappears. Now, one of the books she took out, she was done with it early, and so she actually sent it back. The next book, day 6, she was all done. She says, I'm going to wait and see what happens. Day 7, we got an email saying, your book is gone. You've had it for 7 days. So there's a built-in turnover on the e-books. The variety of books, as I said earlier, varies because the publishers don't know what they're doing yet. And the system has clinks right now. We expect that sometime during 2012 it'll get sorted out and people will be able to use it. One of the problems, of course, it depends on what kind of e-reader you have. When Kindle Fire came out, it took a month or two before they were able to actually get it working right when you can download it. If you wanted to download it from the library, if you wanted to download it from Amazon, it came down instantly. So there's kinks. And one of the things that we got into when we were talking about main library reconfiguration was we aren't going to have as many bookshelves in the new configuration a year and a half from now. And there's a lot of screaming that we're cutting back on our books. We aren't allowing the number of books in the library to increase. And the LIC felt that by that time there's going to be so much demand for e-books that we won't have to have as many paperbacks on the shelf. 6 months from now, we'll have a pretty good idea whether we're right or not.
So I think there's an interesting point you brought up about as the libraries shift more and more towards ebooks, how does that affect the economics of the library? And that might be what I don't know if maybe someone has done the research somewhere. There might be a group of, but it might be worthwhile looking and seeing maybe 3 different scenarios of where we see the trends going, to understand if there's going to be, if there's potentially a significant impact on how we run the libraries and how we fund the libraries, and if we do see that there is perhaps a cause for concern, think about ways in which we can influence how these economics shape up over the next 12 to 18 months or so that happens. Might be something that's worth taking a gander at.
Councilmember Holman.
Yes, well, thank you for the presentation this evening. And a couple of 3 things. One is questions come up earlier about staffing levels and hours of operation system-wide. We get a report on that, so-called a report on that as part of the budget process, but if there's any opportunity or anything you want to highlight for us in between, I would encourage you to find a way to do that. And then another thing is, some time ago, I was inquiring about the purchase of books and whether book purchases, and I would say now this applies to e-book devices as well. If there's any reasonable way to buy those from a local resource so that the city gets the sales tax. I know there are definite publishers and such, but for instance, for the books, when I inquired about some time ago, so it wasn't economically feasible, but also part of that component wasn't how much money the city would get in terms of sales tax. So if you look at that in a comprehensive way, I'm just wondering if there's some opportunity there to increase our sales tax. Just a quick comment about staff. I'm at the downtown library, a fair amount at the main library, more. And whatever you do to nourish staff, it certainly pays off, because the staff is always so courteous and helpful. And a couple of situations recently, one in particular, I was checking out DVDs for a friend who's been very, very ill and wasn't able to retrieve them to get them back on time. And they were just so gracious in saying, if there aren't any holes, we'll extend them beyond. I mean, just that sort of thing, just really above and beyond. They didn't have to do that. So really, whatever you're doing that you can encourage and support and nourish staff, that is very helpful. And then for the moment, indulge me. I know you go by Leo, but for the moment you're Leon. So I don't know if this is a subliminal message that you're sending or what, but you all are the perfect bookends. Leon, Bob, and Noel. So you're the perfect bookends there. So.
Very good.
Okay, we do have 2 speakers, and they'll be provided 3 minutes. First is Carol Zimmerman, to be followed by Jerry Huck.
Should I sit or?
Or you can stand up. Whichever.
Well, I'm a volunteer with Friends of the Palo Alto Library, and I love the library and the staff, and I'm really happy with Monique. And but I don't like this road, the throughway going over the garden. I don't have a garden in the community garden. They were promised when it was granted to them that there would be no such thing happening to them. Now we're rescinding. Same thing as we did with the dump. We get used books from the library all the time. Many of them are 70 years old, huge reference things about genealogy in Ireland. And we sell them, and we raise money that we give back to the library. That's what Friends of the Palo Alto Library does. I also had responsibility for the newsletter. I was editor and publisher of it came out 3 times a year. And we did articles about Link Plus, because that was one of the ways our money was spent. And I mean, we're very happy with Link Plus. Well, one of the articles we wanted to include was some kind of real quick tips on how to use it, and I got online and tried to use it. And the very first thing was the tab I had to click said Link Plus. Well, I'm sorry, that's not what it's known as. Its own little icon, its own little logo. It's Link with a plus sign. So right away I'm upset because it doesn't say Link with a plus sign. And I did report that, and maybe they fixed it. I just felt as if, see, another way I make a lot of money for Friends of the Library is selling books on Amazon. They have the worst website in the world if you're a seller. Well, possibly Charles Schwab is in there too. But It's a horrible, horrible place, and I want our website. I don't want to, it's not easy to do one, but I really wish that the library's website would be better than it was the last time I tried to do Link Plus. I couldn't write the instructions. It's too complicated. It shouldn't be that way. I think other people have said the same thing. But I really also am opposed to that road going through that beautiful community garden. If you need parking spaces, use the lawn area on the Newell Road side. All that is grass, and grass takes water, and we don't have water to spend on grass. Fill it with asphalt, that's fine with me, but do not mess with the garden. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jerry Huck, to be followed by our last speaker, Joe Webb.
I am also speaking against the connector. I'm one of the garden people. I just have a plot there. I think it's a good use of all of this open land. The idea of paving something over is, I assume, somewhat like burning books to the library people. So, I really want to see that connector. I think not see that connector, and I think the people should be able to walk through, make a nice pathway for them. I don't think it's going to be any safer. In fact, I think it'll be less safe. It's going to be a narrow spot. We got people walking around the garden all the time, walking their dogs, doing all that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's a good idea. Let's not pave over anything more, unless the front grass. That's all right.
Yeah,
I should say I do see folks filling out the speaker cards. Just given the time, what I can definitely encourage is that we do have oral communications. You can continue to submit cards, and we do want to move forward with our full council. So if anyone's interested in continuing to submit speakers, we can take them with our full council meeting. Last speaker is Joe Webb. I think I actually saw Joe step out of the room. Mr. Webb step out of the room. What we'll do is just, what I'll do is just actually hold these cards in for once we actually start the full city council meeting. Just to pull it back then to City Council, I do want to echo all the colleagues in thanking the Library Advisory Commission for all of your incredible work this past year. This is just a really exciting time for libraries in Palo Alto, and I know that each year we have something, a very tangible building to look forward to, but it doesn't take away from a lot of the really detailed operations that still go on a regular basis. Just to touch briefly, I think it would be great actually if the LAC or through library staff that there would just be coordinated walkthroughs of the community garden area. I know that some colleagues have already done that. I haven't done it myself, but just to have a chance to see the site, it would be great just to get a sense of it directly.
Come walk my dog.
I am dogless, so actually. The other area, I do want to support what the commissioner said about just what we can do at this time. As the publishers are figuring out what they're doing as it relates to making ebook resources available and how they're making it available. I do think of, to the extent that there are legislative solutions for public services, and that's a library is different from individuals purchasing it. It's not for a commercial purpose, and I think to the extent that there's some dialogue that can be started, I just think of a potential legislative solution. So if the LAC has bandwidth to look at that, it would be really helpful to know if there's some way that we can approach. I don't know if it needs to go to the federal level, at least the state level, that we can start thinking through what some of the options are. My belief was that there's some, I think this is only for academic institutions, but Google Scholar was aiming to scan all of the academic resources and then to make it available to universities. And I'm curious if something like that can be made to a governmental entity, but just maybe in a different structure. And the last is just, as our library spaces are being renovated, I don't know the demand for community use of the new spaces. And to the extent that, if there is a different type of demand for these new spaces that are coming on board through our libraries, it'd be great to know if there's, I don't know if there is currently a significant pricing differential for community groups versus private use of some of the spacing, but that's something if the Library Advisory Commission can look at that during the budget process, it'd be helpful. With that, I know we're about almost 10 minutes over our allotted time, so I just wanted to thank the LAC again, and we will reconvene the full council meeting in chambers.
where I started from, where foothills and marshlands glow by the bay. And each Monday evening the council meets till break of day. Our city hall stands 8 floors high, but just 6 are occupied, where laws of logic are defied. Palo Alto, here I come. Palo Alto, here I come. Right back where I started from. Our cops keep it safe here to stroll after dark. Our medics are quick when they're called out to the skateboard park. Our sewage treatment is world class, so's our water and our gas. Everybody sing en masse. Palo Alto, here I come.
Vince Larkin coming to you live from the Palo Alto City Council chambers in downtown Palo Alto. As tonight we bring you the first regular meeting of the Yahweh Yay administration, along with Greg Sharp as the new vice mayor. On this, the national championship night. It's great that you're tuning in and listening to the first regularly scheduled meeting for Yahweh Yay, who is the second youngest mayor in Palo Alto's history. And it is last week was quite an event. It was the Yahweh Yay show, and it was also the Sid Espinoza farewell tour, and it was also the, even though he's still on the council, it also was the Greg Scharf versus Greg Schmidt, the Greg versus Greg SmackDown, and it was Greg Scharf who is our vice mayor, and it is going to be very interesting. You've got two very different styles. Greg Scharf, who is very determined on things like cutting the budget, going up against leading the successful surge by the council to defeat the arbitration, the union arbitration, and Yahweh Yay, who is more quiet in the way he works behind the scenes. He is an auditor and, of course, a Peace Corps veteran. He does things in a different, unique manner, and we're going to see that tonight, how he will delve into issues. He likes to delve into issues. He does not talk in various high-profile way like Sid Espinoza does, but he is very detailed, and we will see that is how he runs these meetings. So tonight the council has kicked things off early with meeting with the Library Advisory Committee in the chambers, and that had to do with a historic location on 925 Ramona Street and other library issues. For example, Kindles in the library. For those of you who have their Kindles at home, or you're reading your Kindle, and how will that affect the library in the future? Will that eliminate books? So they touched on various things, and they are now ready to come out and start their regularly scheduled meeting tonight. The meeting tonight has several consent items on it. Of course, these items can appear magically as they are turned into, with the help of a council member, a regular agenda item. So that may happen. Then we do have some action items. One is a public hearing on the objection to weed abatements and the adoption of a resolution ordering the weed nuisance abated. And then we have item number 10 is a public hearing of the approval of the request for the removal of a Category 4 single-family residential building at 935 Ramona Street from the city's historic inventory. We also have a closed session tonight with the city attorney dealing with existing litigation. That has to do with the city of Palo Alto versus High Speed Rail Authority and the Superior Court of California, County of Sacramento. Certainly. So we will see.
So the public knows, we just finished a study session with our Library Advisory Commission and just about to begin our full City Council meeting. Colleagues? Great, thank you. I know our first item on the agenda this evening is for city manager comments. Go ahead and turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. Congratulations again. Nice to see everybody. Happy New Year. Actually, first along those lines, I would like to put forth a reminder to and an invitation to help us celebrate the Lunar New Year Spectacular at an annual event which is great for families and children of all ages. It'll be held this Saturday, January 14th from 10 to 3 at the Children's Library at 1276 Harriet Street, and is sponsored by the Friends of the Palo Alto Library, the Think Tank Learning, Studio Kicks, and the Palo Alto Arts Center. So come and enjoy lion dancing, kung fu demonstration, story time, arts and crafts, and Asian food. So that's this Saturday, January 14th. Also, to celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and his teachings on community service, this year's Martin Luther King Day Junior Day of Service will continue as we initiated last year, really led by Youth Community Service, along with City of Palo Alto, the YMCA, Canopy, Break Through the Static, and other community partners. Will be hosting this Martin Luther King Family Service Day in Lytton Plaza in downtown on Monday, January 16th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And there'll be various activity tables, live music, an open microphone featuring local artists. It's a fun event, but it's also an important chance for people to come and do something to help others. Next, just a reminder that the City Council has scheduled a special study session on January 17th with the Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission. And at that meeting, the Commission, otherwise known as the IBRIC, will present its findings and recommendations to maintain and enhance cities' buildings, parks, roads, transportation facilities. And that meeting will begin at 7 p.m. in these council chambers here at City Hall. And another reminder that the City Council will be holding your annual priority setting retreat. That is scheduled for Saturday, January 21st from 9 a.m. to approximately 2 p.m. and that will be held in the Palo Alto Downtown Library Community Room at 270 Forest Avenue. And that, again, is the time when the council meets with the public, council, and staff to discuss the upcoming year's priorities and strategic agenda. I did want to just quickly announce that a meeting was held at 5 p.m. with folks on Cowper Street about the fate of the tree George, which is going to need to come down, and there's a replanting schedule, but I've heard that it was a positive and successful community meeting that did take place just a little while ago. And then lastly, knowing that I'm at the risk of being written up by the auditor for violating the city manager comments remarks, I did think that since our new auditor was here, we ought to just give him a quick chance to say hi to the council on his first day. So, Jim.
Welcome. Good evening. Thanks. Thank you for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it. And congratulations again to the mayor and vice mayor, and happy to be here. I know Councilmember Shepherd had a follow-up question for the city manager.
Yes, I understand that the item on the 17th, the iBrick that will be coming to the City Council, and it's listed as an action item, not study session on the tentative calendar. So I just wanted to understand what it is that we're doing. Are we going to be taking action on this, or is it just a presentation and a delivery of the product?
I think that we'll have some more information that will be coming out about the report and even in relation to the council retreat possibly, but it essentially is a study session, and the extent that we list it as an action item is just if there were specific directions or whatever as follow-up that the council did want to be able to take action on and direct us. But the idea, there's so much information there, and the commission has worked so long, we really saw it as a intensive educational session for the public on their report and their findings. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. The next item we have is oral communications, and this evening we have 3 speakers. If anyone is here for the first time, we do have speaker cards that are available at the back of the chambers. You can submit them to the city clerk's representatives just here in the front, and you're provided 3 minutes for speaking to any item that's not on the agenda for this evening. So the first speaker is Jerry Hearn, to be followed by Joe Webb.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Jerry Hearn, and I'm appearing tonight in my role as chair of the Project Management Group, which is a collection of volunteers that's been tasked by the Environmental Volunteers Board with overseeing the restoration of the old Sea Scout building to become our new home. And I thought I would update you tonight a little bit on our progress. As you may know, the entire process has been a challenging one for the EV, both in the length and the complexity of the project and securing the necessary funding. It began about 7 years ago when your council issued an RFP for the leasing of the building. Today, after an exhausting designing, planning, and permitting process and some delays in construction, we're at the verge of completion. During that time, the cost has escalated to over $3 million, which we've raised through the generosity of our many committed donors. The fact that the building is of a historical significance and located in a very sensitive area meant that we had to gain approval from a host of agencies and entities and a number of city departments. Our goal of making the building as sustainable as possible ran into some limitations due to these factors, and compromises had to be made. So though it won't compare with Y2E2 on the campus, we'll be walking our environmental talk within those limitations. All along, our vision has been for the building much more than merely a home for our operations. Rather, we envision it as an eco-center, a resource for the entire community, as well as a place for us to carry out our educational mission. Situated next to the marsh, our doors will open on an incomparable area of wildlife that will be readily observable by our visitors. Signage around the eco-center will highlight for generations in the future the building's history, life in a marsh, native marsh plants, and other elements of natural history. Right across our front porch runs the Bay Trail, serving as a vital link in the completion of that effort. The building itself will become our greatest teaching tool. Inside, we will tell more of the story of its past, and our green building tours will show many aspects of sustainable elements that we've managed to include. In addition, there will be 4 exhibits entitled Earth, Sea, Sky, and Human. They're sort of learning stations at which visitors can interact with touch screens to access updated digital information pertaining to these content areas. And then there's my favorite item, the hole in the floor. It's a glass, see-through viewing area where you can actually watch the tide flow underneath the building and back and see the elements that are at work under there. As of today, we're completing the interior finishing work, installing the outside ramps, designing our signage, and doing the final landscaping. On January 27th, we'll be hosting a pickleweed planting party to complete our responsibilities under CEQA, as well as having a bit of fun. You'll all be invited to that party, as well as to the grand opening sometime in June. Throughout this long journey, the council and the city staff have been very helpful and supportive of our efforts, and we would like to express our appreciation for that. It has been and will continue to be a rewarding partnership. In closing, I hope to see some of you out there planting pickleweed and enjoying the beautiful natural setting of our new home.
Thank you. And just consistent, since none of these items are agendized, City Council is not able to respond to any of the topics raised during oral communications. Our following speaker is Joe Webb, to be followed by our last speaker, Omar Chatty.
Good evening, Council, citizens of Palo Alto. This is my web for my email for anybody who wants to. I don't know if anybody can read this, but from the public, but it's WEBFOOTE41@yahoo.com. A couple of weeks ago, I addressed you on my complaint with the Palo Alto players. Today, I want to bring it up to date, particularly over after talking to the city attorney, Ms. Stump. A couple of weeks ago, I talked to you about Parade, which I claimed was a defamation of Southern whites, that it lied about the Leo Frank trial. And I pointed out that this defamation of Southern whites is okay, but they shouldn't be doing it on the public nickel, which is Palo Alto's nickel. They also threatened me at the time I was leafleting with calling the police 3 times. Police finally did arrive. I told you about that. And then I told you that I had appeared at the Human Resources Commission December 8th, and the chair, Claude Ezron, and another member, Mrs. Savage, got up and walked out on me. Well, the Brown Act. Shakespeare. The Brown Act is supposed to support, protect people like me against governmental abuse and, let's call it chutzpah. How about the insolence of office? So anyway, I've spent 2 weeks trying to get a hold of the city attorney. Nobody calls me back. Finally, today I called the city manager's office. Shortly thereafter, I got a call from Ms. Stump. She told me that, well, I did have recourse to the AG. She said that which I'm going to go to. She also said that no quorum issues were involved. This is lead somebody around on a merry chase. I said, let's get back to the issue. The Brown Act talks about willful disruption. Willful disruption. Those 2 people getting out and walking out on me was willful, and it was disruptive. It was contemptuous and demonstrated hatred. I think they're both Jews. I don't know, but I suppose they are. I suspect they are. I don't want to defame anybody. Okay. Anyway, then she said, her syntax and her diction, she said, let me see what she said. They were not going to pursue it. Her syntax and her diction suggest it's pursuable. Now, I'm not dummy. I'm not a lawyer. I got good grades in constitutional law when I was pre-law. Thank God I decided not to become a lawyer. Okay, you should fire Ezran and this other gal, Savage. Find somebody else who has some respect for, quote, quote, human relations. Okay? Human Relations Commission. So I suspect you won't. Let's see. Oh, you should do something about the Palo Alto players. They also removed, as I said to you before,
Thank you, sir.
The play Zootopia
thank you,
from
sir.
their website after I complained. In other words, down the Orwellian hole.
Sir, thank you. Our next speaker is Omar Chatty. And actually, we do have our last speaker to be followed by Elspeth Newfield.
Hello. Thank you for your time. I just want to mention again, as I push to see that we can get rid of this Caltrain kill train that's killing so many people out there. Remember on January 2nd, it killed this first person right here in Menlo Park. It was a Palo Alto resident, 31 years old, of South Asian descent. That makes 16 that died last year. 5 of them were killed in Palo Alto. 177 people have died since 1995 on this train. It is time to move on. We've become too urbanized for this train. It served its purpose. As I said before, I was a member of this thing when we started it in 1982, the Committee to Revive the Railroad, but times change. And I would suggest that we start planning as fast as possible to bring BART up the peninsula, station by station, replacing the Caltrain. BART will start construction in April. In the other side, I just listened to Chuck Reed on the radio, and he feels very confident of having funds all the way to Santa Clara. Let's start planning now. If it takes 10 years, that's another 120 people that are going to die if we do the same kill rate. High-speed rail, I'm beginning to believe more and more that that Caltrain is a shill for high-speed rail because of the standard track. Your wonderful position on high-speed rail recently ties in with Kings County and a number of other cities, and now Southern California Democrats are asking to look at the high-speed rail money that's been dedicated and see about congressional legislation to channel it into Southern California transit projects, just like the Central Valley Republican congressmen are looking to do it for Highway 99, and we need to start asking our congresspeople to do it. Remember, if you envision BART coming up here, well, first of all, I need to ask you to do a challenge. If you have the time, please go to Meadow, Charleston, or Churchill and stand by that track, and you'll understand how dangerous this train is, right in the middle of Palo Alto. No wonder so many Palo Altans are getting killed. Go there and just stand like I do when I take my picket sign after somebody dies and watch it. That train is out of date, and it needs to go. It's really dangerous. Okay, real quick, because I'm out of time almost. Remember, if we can get BART up here, it's a 60-mile route. You can have a bikeway next to it. BART has already proven it's responsive to local needs. It can go, they've tunneled, they've done over, and they've done at grade. I think they can work with the Palo Alto and Peninsula City Councils to work well. Remember, too, that if we can get BART going with the planning time we have now until 2018 when it comes to Santa Clara, that'll give the construction industry jobs for 15 years. 15 years, and that'll, in case you're getting any flack from the leadership group or the Bay Area Council or any of the construction people, tell them to look at extending BART up the corridor here, and then we tie in the whole Bay Area into real mass transit. So I would ask you to please consider that. And so thank you for your time. That's all I needed to say. I just wanted to hit the point. But here we start the death count, and I'll be here as much as possible every time somebody dies, just to remind it, because I think you're the best one of the best city councils, if not the best city council in the whole Bay Area. Thank you.
And our last speaker is Elspeth Newfield.
Good evening. I think several of you already know me from your political activities. I want to belatedly speak on the library road issue. The main community garden is a tremendous Palo Alto asset. It's 50 years old. It was established at the same time that the library was built. If you look at the dedication of the gardeners and the long waiting list to get a plot at the community garden, you'll understand how important this is to the community. To build a road through the community garden is like tearing down an historic structure to build a parking lot. Please consider another alternative. And I hope you'll vote no on the current proposal. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. That concludes our oral communications. We move on to approval of minutes. Can entertain any motions from colleagues?
Move approval.
It's been moved by Councilmember Espinoza, seconded by Councilmember Klein. Please indicate your vote on the board.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, could it be the revised minutes that are at places?
Yeah. Accepted by the mover and seconder that the revised minutes be approved. If colleagues can indicate their vote. Great. Passes 9-0. Next item on the agenda is the consent calendar.
I'll move the consent calendar.
Consent calendar approval has been moved by Councilmember Shepherd, seconded by Councilmember Espinoza. Seeing no lights, if colleagues can indicate their vote on the board. Passes 9-0. So with the approval of the consent calendar, under item number 8, the City Council just approved the employment agreement with our new Public Works Director, Mike Sarter. And I wanted to congratulate him and ask him if he would like to come up and share some comments with us.
Good evening, Mayor Ye and members of the City Council. I just want to say I am very proud and humbled to be chosen as your next Public Works Director, and I look forward to many years of service in this capacity. There are many initiatives that I know you are aware of that I am very excited to be involved in over the next few years, such as fixing the refuse fund, repairing our aging infrastructure, completing the library capital program successfully, closing the landfill and opening parkland and open space for all Palo Alto residents to enjoy, exploring the potential of an energy compost facility, strengthening our urban forest program, building an enhanced sustainability office, and even taking over the Palo Alto airport here soon. I'm looking forward, very forward, to working with you, the community, the city manager, the executive leadership team, and the rest of city staff on all of these initiatives. I'd like to acknowledge my wife, Sue, and other members of city staff that are here tonight to support me. And again, I am really appreciative of this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Congratulations once again. I know moving on to the next item on the agenda is our agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Just look to my colleagues to see if there are any proposals. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to our action items. The first action item is our public hearing on objections to weed abatement and adoption of resolution ordering weed nuisance abated. This is the time and place set for a public hearing on a resolution ordering weed nuisance abated. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing and let the record show that notice of this hearing has been given in the time, manner, and form provided for in Chapter 8.08 of the Palo Alto Municipal Code. Has the city clerk received any objections?
No, I have not.
Is there anyone in the public who wishes to be heard? Seeing that there have been no objections received and no members of the public wish to speak to this item, the hearing is now closed. Let the record show that 0 persons appeared or filed written objections against these weed abatement proceedings, and that any resolution passed by the council on this matter will reflect this finding. Now I'll turn to colleagues and entertain any motions to adopt a resolution ordering weed nuisance abated. Councilmember Shepherd.
I would like to move the recommendation by staff for weed abatement.
We have a motion by Councilmember Shepherd, seconded by Councilmember Schmid. Any discussion or questions by colleagues? All right, seeing none, if colleagues can indicate their vote on the board. Passes 9-0. I do want to acknowledge we did have a county representative who was available for questions. I know that we often do get a representative from the county who comes. We always appreciate your presence. And since there are no questions, thanks for coming this evening. Hope you have a good one. Turning to our last agenda item, it also is a public hearing. This is the approval of request for removal of a Category 4 single-family residential building at 935 Ramona Street from the city's historic inventory. So let me go ahead and turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Curtis Williams, Director of Planning and Community Environment, and Stephen Turner, our Advanced Planning Manager, is going to make the presentation on this item. Thank you.
Good evening. The request before the council tonight is for the removal of the residence at 935 Ramona Street from the historic inventory. It's currently designated as a Category 4 historic structure due to loss of historic integrity. A little background on the building. The original historic inventory was adopted in 1980, and at that time, the subject property at 935 Ramona Street was added to the inventory as a Category 4 structure. At the time, it was listed as an example of a relatively unaltered Queen Anne architectural style that was prevalent at the time of its construction in 1895. Since the listing on the inventory, there's been numerous interior and exterior alterations between 1980 and 2007. The current owners purchased the property in 2007, and in August of last year, the owners submitted a request to remove the residence from the inventory. As part of the application materials, the property owners hired Garavalia Architecture Incorporated to prepare a historic resource evaluation to assess the historic significance of the building. That report is in the staff report as attachment B. Garavalia evaluated the building based upon the adopted standards in the municipal code in order to establish historic significance. They looked at the definitions of categories 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the historic inventory. They looked at the criteria for designation, which is used when evaluating properties for historic significance. And then finally, once the significance of the resource was established, its integrity was also analyzed to determine if the existing structure retains enough of its characteristics to express why it should be considered historic and be retained on the historic list. To make this determination, Garavalia utilized the 7 aspects of integrity as defined by the National Register criteria for evaluation. And those 7 criteria are location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And those standards are all described within the staff report and in Garavalia's evaluation. The conclusion from Garavalia's evaluation was that the building was extensively modified over time and does not appear to qualify for continued listing on the inventory as a Category 4 structure. It should be noted that Garavalia examined the building as a whole, including all 4 exterior elevations, to reach this conclusion. City staff, including the historic preservation planner, Dennis Backlund, reviewed the materials prepared by the applicant and concurred with Garavalia's conclusion. That recommendation to remove 935 Ramona from the inventory was forwarded to the HRB, which conducted a public hearing for the project on September 21st, 2011. At the conclusion of that public hearing, the HRB unanimously recommended that the City Council retain the property on the inventory as Category 4. The focus of the HRB in making this recommendation was the review of the building from the public right-of-way. The main points identified by the HRB were related to the 7 aspects of integrity and also the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Namely, those main points are that the building retains the historic fabric at the front facade, that the building is in its original location, that the sense of feeling is apparent when walking or driving by the house, that the changes that have occurred to the property are consistent with the Secretary standards for rehabilitation, and that new features are differentiated from the old. Because of the opposing recommendations between city staff and the HRB, staff felt that it would be appropriate to provide the council with each recommendation tonight. The record of land use action contained in your staff report reflects staff's recommendation for removal of the residence from the inventory. There are a few corrections based upon some comments from Councilmember Holman. In Section 2, the second line should read, removal of the historic designation that has lost historic integrity is not a project under the California Environmental Quality Act. In Section 3D, the word in parentheses, interior and exterior, will be removed. And in Section 3B, the wording of that subsection will be changed to structures designated as Category 3 or 4 in the historic inventory that have had exterior alterations shall retain historic integrity consistent with the following definition, and then it provides the definition of the Category 3 and 4 resource. Finally, the applicant provided council with supplemental information, most of which is already contained in your staff report tonight. The one new item is a peer review of the Garavalia evaluation prepared by Page and Turnbull. That report is dated January 3rd, 2012. Staff didn't refer to this evaluation in the staff report in that it was submitted after the HRB made their recommendation. That concludes the staff report. We have the chair of the HRB, Martin Bernstein, to represent the HRB and has some comments. And we have the property owner, Christopher Pickett, who will be available to make a presentation. But before Marty, I'll have Curtis Williams make a few comments about the process.
Thank you, Stephen. I just did want to note that there have been some questions about what process this project would go through if it is deleted from the list and subsequent development occurs. And that process would be the same process as for any other residence in town. So if assuming a second story is proposed, then an individual review process would be required with notice to neighbors, determinations relative to privacy and compatibility on the streetscape. and then a building permit would be required. If no second story were required and there were just modifications at the first story level, or a single story home were built, then it would individual review process would not be required. It would just be a building permit review. Glad to answer questions, and I think Mr. Bernstein is here to speak on HRB's behalf.
Martin, let me go ahead and turn it over to your chair of our Historic Resources Board. Feel free to sit in either location. I know if you have slides, but we just need to make sure that he's mic'd.
And is that working properly? I don't want to turn my back to you, but I think I need to be closer to this.
Exactly. It's better to be closer to the microphone.
Thank you, Mayor Ye and Council. I'm Martin Bernstein, Chair of the Historic Resources Board, Palo Alto. To be clear, the City of Palo Alto Historic Preservation Ordinance mandates exterior review only and not interior review. The HRB emphasizes the street-facing facade. The ordinance defines category historic 4 as, I'm just reading this so that the council and the public can understand our measure. Category 4, a contributing building which is a good local example of an architectural style and relates to the character of a neighborhood grouping in scale, materials, proportion, and other factors. A contributing building may have had extensive or permanent changes made to the original design, such as inappropriate additions, extensive removal of architectural detail, or wooden facades resurfaced in asbestos or stucco. That's the quote of the definition. The HRB visited the site and from the street and the public view and determined that the existing character-defining historic fabric features intact are its location, shape, the barge board detail, the brackets, the shingles, the siding, the stairs, certainly the sense, the feeling of history. There are, for example, and part of that whole street, there are about 4 homes across the street built around turn of the century also. There is a plaque on the building identifying the house was built in 1895. However, as of today, that plaque has been removed. The board has received and reviewed only one historic resources evaluation prepared by Garavaglia, as Stephen Turner mentioned. We reviewed that report quite carefully. It references 11 changes to the building's interior and changes to the rear of the house. The report's conclusion comments that it references the complete loss of the interior design. Again, this ordinance mandates only interior review. The HRB would welcome receiving another historic resources evaluation if the applicant elects to provide one. As Stephen Turner mentioned, the board has only received the one provided by Garavaglia, and therefore no chance to review any other HREs for additional recommendations to the council. Another note is that the council directs the HRB to use the United States Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation to analyze historic resources. There are 10 standards. The standards applicable to this property include standards 1, 3, 4, 6, 9, and 10. They are referenced in your packet. If the mayor and council elects, I can read those items, or it could take some time, but as the council elects, I can read it or not. So.
I think it's all right. It's part of the public record. So
okay, very good.
Thank you.
All right, anyway, so there's 6 out of 10 standards that apply, that are applicable to this project. Another point to make is that the Palo Alto ordinance allows for significant additions to a listed historic structure as long as the proposed changes are in substantial conformance with the Secretary's published standards. As many members of the community and council will know, just by walking and driving around and seeing under construction at this date, there are many projects approved with major additions to the historic properties. The benefits of historic designation may permit additions that can result in substantial financial benefits also. So it is through this HRB's analysis of the existing historic characteristics and the board's unanimous motion that the board recommends to the City Council that the 117-year-old house at 935 Ramona Street be retained on the city's historic inventory.
Great, thank you very much. I know at this point I wanted to open the public hearing. What we procedurally have is the applicant, we provide 10 minutes for presentation, and I believe that the owner of the residence is here to present directly. So you have 10 minutes, and what you'll see is just the green light. Once you reach 1 minute left, then you'll see the light turn yellow, and then it'll buzz it when you're out of time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak before you. I'd like to start by introducing my family and myself. I'm Chris Pickett. This is my wife, Rebecca Giraldi, my son, Wolf, and my daughter, Winter. I'd also like to acknowledge that some of our friends are here to support us tonight. If you could stand up. And introduce Christina Dykes from Page and Turnbull, who will, if the council will allow, take a portion of my time to address you. We request the council vote tonight to take our house at 935 Ramona Street off of the historic inventory because it lacks sufficient integrity to be on it. Why do I say that? Because we believe we follow the process the city lays out, and it's led us to that conclusion. We were asked by the planning staff to get an expert report. The planning staff gave us a list of 5 expert historic preservationists with which we could go to. We chose Garavalia Architecture. Garavalia did a thorough investigation. They produced a thorough report. The conclusion of that report was that our house should be taken off of the historic inventory. In fact, they went on to say that our house is not historically significant at any level. The city planning staff, as you've heard, agrees with Garavalia Architecture that our house should be taken off of the historic inventory. The HRB disagreed. And I'd like to take an opportunity to apologize to the HRB. I'm sorry that we were not at the September 21st meeting. We wanted to be. We were pretty committed to being chaperones for our children's school for a camping trip, but we certainly wanted to be. There was no disrespect meant. Even though I disagree with the HRB's conclusion, I know that the HRB is a difficult job, and they try their best. The HRB chose not to agree with Garavalia, and they chose not to agree with the staff. In doing so, we don't believe that the HRB did as thorough an investigation as Garavalia or the staff. We also believe this is a case of first impression for this particular HRB. This is only the second time in 12 years that this type of request has come forward, that a house would be taken off of the historic inventory for loss of integrity. The HRB also, if you look at the transcript from the meeting, only took a look at and thought was important the front facade of our house and not the entirety of the exterior of the house, as the test says that you have to do. And lastly, the HRB used in part and relied in part on the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, which is not a correct test for evaluating historic integrity. After the HRB's recommendation against us, we engaged a second historic preservationist firm from the city's recommended list of 5, the Page and Turnbull firm. Page and Turnbull did a peer review of the Garavalia report. We wanted to know if Garavalia was right or not. They did a thorough investigation, produced a thorough report, and their finding was our house should be taken off of the historic inventory. Garavalia and Page and Turnbull are certified expert historic preservationists on the city's own list of recommended historic experts. Absent a compelling reason, their conclusions should stand. It's for these reasons and the reasons that I've detailed in my memo to the council earlier that we ask you to vote tonight to take our house off of the historic inventory. And now, if you'll allow me to bring up Christina Dykes from Page and Turnbull, we're happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of City Council. As Mr. Pickett has said, my name is Christina Dykes, and I'm an architectural historian at Page and Turnbull in San Francisco. I evaluate the historic significance and integrity of buildings for a number of reasons, following methodology governed by local municipal code, the California Office of Historic Preservation, and the National Park Service. We were tasked with peer-reviewing Garavalia's historic resource evaluation, which is the report of record, in order to provide an independent finding regarding the historic integrity of the residence at 935 Ramona. We conducted a site visit, reviewed Garavalia's report and primary resources, and produced our own evaluation using the 7 aspects of integrity. Eligibility is typically based upon 2 interrelated concepts, significance and integrity. We did not dispute the building's historic significance as it was listed in 1980. However, in order to retain eligibility as a historic resource, a property must be shown to have sufficient historic integrity to represent that significance. We did not evaluate the building using the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation because they are intended to evaluate proposed new rehabilitation projects that have the potential to affect historic resources. It's not an appropriate way to use them in this instance. Through analyzing the 7 aspects of integrity, Page and Turnbull came to nearly the same conclusion as Garavalia, though we do believe that the integrity of interiors should not factor into an assessment for continued listing on a historical register unless interior features are specifically called out in a nomination as character defining. And condition of materials should also not be factored into a discussion of integrity. We agree with Garavalia that the building retains integrity of location, but does not retain sufficient integrity of design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, or association. Our assessment is included in the packet of information submitted by the owners. The building was designated a historic resource on the Palo Alto Historic Inventory based on the significance for its architecture, which makes the integrity of its physical features all the more important to retain so that it can continue to represent its historic significance. Likewise, because the building is individually listed due to its architecture, rather than listed as a contributing resource to a historic district, we evaluated the entire building for retention of integrity. The building was designated as a Category 4 building at a time when it was considered to have few changes. Since we found that the building does not retain integrity, we agree with Garavalia that it can no longer represent its architectural significance adequately, even as a Category 4 resource, and should therefore be removed from the inventory. Thank you.
Does that conclude the applicant's presentation?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. What we'll do at this point of the public hearing is return to the City Council for questions and comments before opening up to members of the public who have submitted a speaker card. So let me turn to colleagues for any questions or comments on the project before us. Councilmember Price.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, and thank you to the owner for coming before us, and for Mr. Bernstein of the Historic Resources Board. There seems to be a difference of opinion about many aspects of this project, but I guess where I'm what concerns me is the reference to the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation and the utilization of those standards in the analysis of this project. There seem to be 2 very different opinions or sets of opinions regarding the appropriateness of using the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation in this case. So could the staff please comment on that? And I know this was also noted in the professional review by Page and Turnbull.
Staff believes that the methodology followed by Garibaldi architecture is the correct methodology, in that first you determine the significance of the property, and that is done through the criteria for designation as contained in the municipal code. Once that historic significance is identified, the question is, does the historic significance, was it been retained since the property was added to the list? And the best way to evaluate whether or not that significance has been retained is through the use of the integrity findings that have been described tonight. The Secretary of the Interior standards are appropriate when looking at the effect of proposed changes on a historic resource and whether or not those changes are consistent with the Secretary standards for retention of that historic resource. I believe, and Martin Bernstein from the HRB can describe this as well, but in the HRB's review, they used the Secretary standards for rehabilitation when comparing the changes that have happened over time. And based upon their view, the changes over time appeared to be consistent with the Secretary standards, and that was their finding as part of their motion to retain the building as a Category 4 historic resource. So staff feels that it's appropriate to use the integrity findings. I believe the HRB used the Secretary standards when looking at the sum of all of the alterations that have occurred over the years to determine whether or not those changes are essentially consistent with the standards.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Well, I first want to thank you for coming tonight. I do want to disclose I did briefly talk to the owner here about his home, but I didn't go into any detail, and so there was nothing to change my opinion about or to make a move on how I'm going to be thinking about this process. And I also want to thank Councilmember Holman for her good questions, noticing the land use action and making those corrections. I thought that was very appropriate. So I'm going to go into questions because I noticed that in the minutes it talks about the fact that now, you know, if it gets removed from Category 4, that they can demolish the house. It's my understanding we don't have a moratorium on any demolition of houses except for in the downtown area, and they would be Category 1 and Category 2. So can you just explain how that works for demolition?
Yes, there is a demolition. Thank you for your comment, Councilmember Shepherd. There's essentially a demolition delay for structures that historic structures are in the downtown or Category 1 or 2 buildings. Part of that process to determine whether or not the building could be demolished is to perform a historic evaluation on the property to determine its historic significance, and that would ultimately feed into the development of an environmental impact report that would be prepared that would analyze the removal of that structure from essentially the inventory or the historic district, and whether or not that demolition could be mitigated in any way. Usually, in almost all cases, that there is no mitigation for the loss of a historic resource, and in order to certify the EIR, the council would need to adopt a statement of overriding considerations saying that there are more important considerations at play rather than the retention of the historic resource. So that would be a summary of the process for demolishing of.
But this is a Category 4 home, so where would this fall and how would that be if we don't make any move tonight at all?
The if you don't delete it from the list, okay, at that point then it would be considered remain a historic resource, and there's not a prohibition against demolition, but there is an environmental review process. So as Stephen is mentioning, we would initially look from an environmental review standpoint as to determine whether this is, you know, still significant, and there could still be a determination that it's not, but there's sort of a presumption that it is and that it remains on the list. And so if it's demolished, then it likely would be a significant, as you mentioned, a significant environmental impact, and most likely would require an EIR to remove it. If it's not on the list, if it's deleted from the list, all that goes away. It's a ministerial act. The demolition is allowed, and then into the development review process.
So whether you're in a historic district or not, that doesn't shelter the property from an EIR, from a residential EIR, if they want to demolish the property.
It doesn't shelter it from the potential for an EIR. Now, we would have, again, dependent on the review, and contrast that with the Lincoln property that came before you. If we had early done the environmental analysis, initial study, our determination was we would have determined it was not a significant environmental impact. Would not have had to have gone through an EIR on that process.
Okay, and that didn't even have a category, it was just in the district.
Right, that was a contributing structure.
Okay, and then the reason why I'm asking this question is that I'm noticing in Dennis Auckland's presentation, he says that since this is a category 3 or 4 and it's not in a historic district, there is no requirement that any change or renovation to this building be brought forward to HRB. And so I'm just trying to figure out what difference does it make, and it makes a difference whether it's got the category attached to it in a demolition process only, or since they can actually renovate and remodel without going through the process that a category 1 and 2 would go through. So can you just explain that to me a little better?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Shepherd. If it's a rehabilitation, addition, other than a demolition, then we do have our ordinance is voluntary, basically, is that you have to go to the HRB. HRB has to review and can comment on the changes, but the applicant is not required to abide by those changes. Now, we do still have an environmental review process, so there still is some review of that compatibility issue relative to the standards for rehabilitation that were discussed. So there would still be that level to be sure that that's mitigated, the impacts are mitigated, and it's not transformed into something entirely different from the historic nature of the historic structure.
So, excuse me. This means then that all the Category 3 and Category 4 homes in Palo Alto could be slowly losing their integrity because nobody's kind of keeping an eye. Is that how this works, or?
That is certainly true, at least theoretically. I think staff and the HRB have had a very good success record at working with applicants to be compatible with additions and changes to those structures. And I think the HRB deserves a lot of credit, and Dennis Backlund as well, for working with applicants to come in and finding ways to accommodate their needs while still retaining the historic nature of the changes. That apparently is not the case on this house, but it has been on many other homes.
But it still would go through design review if they wanted to do a major renovation for the exterior and interior. Well, I don't have to comment on interior, but for exterior, they would have to do a major they would have to go through design
Category
review.
3 or 4 would still have to have ARB input. If it had a second story associated with the changes, then it would go through our individual review process with neighbor notification and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to understand that process better.
Councilmember Schmid.
Yeah, if I could ask Martin Bernstein a couple questions. A follow-up to what Councilmember Price was asking about. I guess I'm concerned the message we are giving to the public and their understanding of the process. I guess it's not so often we see a board and the staff in disagreement. Now, Councilmember Price raised the issue of the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation are not the right ones to apply. What's your thought and response to that?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Schmidt. For example, if you look at, and I have it in front of me, all the 10 standards, Standard number 9 talks about the new work shall be differentiated from the old. And so we just use that as a measure to look at, okay, how much integrity is here or not. And so if the historical aspects of the house are differentiated from the new things that have been added, that just helps us measure that it's meeting some federal guidelines, some federal standards of measuring something. It helps us support. It helped us to support the idea that the historic fabric, enough of it is intact because it's separate from the new work that was done. And then also then standard number 10, it discusses. I'll just quote. It says, "New additions and adjacent or related new construction shall be undertaken in such a manner that, if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired." Again, we've used an example. There was another house that came before us where it was major additions were done to the front of the house. This came before us about a month ago. And again, without any HRB review of those additions that were done in maybe 1970, I think, something like that, 1980, the board used the standard saying, okay, this would not have measured up to the changes that were made back then, but it's still appropriate to use that to try to get some filter through which to make decisions about is it historic or not, or what's historic and what's remaining. So it becomes like a filter to help us evaluate how much integrity is there. So that's the value of using the standards to take some measurement of what's existing.
But the outside consultant and the staff felt that it was more appropriate to use the 7 criteria listed in the historical inventory ordinance, which are somewhat different. So is the public aware that you might be using a different standard?
We also reviewed the seven significant aspects also, and I think that was mentioned in our verbatim minutes. So we did use that. So however the public learns about the process, I mean, that's always a challenge through the administrative events. So.
Now, one of the other differences between your approach was to say from the street, looking at the property, while the outside consultant was saying you have to look at the 4 sides of the property and the roof. And once you do that, you see there had been substantial changes on at least 2 sides are radically different.
That is correct, and the HRB has approved and recommended approval of many projects where there have been substantial changes on the sides and rears. Because, again, the direction that the HRB has received is to focus mainly on the street-facing facade. And I'd like to point out the picture on the left on the screen, and that has a pretty good sense of history. Just, I mean, it's unaltered in its form. I mean, I think a picture is worth thousands of our words. So, but emphasizing, so it's always been the direction of HRB focus on, because that's the direction from the council throughout the years has been. Says what's the public presence of the historic resource, and that's the measure we've been using.
Yeah, the third issue that seemed to be a real differentiator was that the staff gave the applicant a list of 5 credible historical review firms. They actually ended up going to 2 of them, and both came back and said, yes, this is not a historical property. Now, that would seem to, do you disagree with that process of using outside peer review groups?
I have no disagreement with the process. We came to different conclusions.
Okay, I guess one thing I come away with is, as a council member, how do we work through disagreements, valid disagreements, but tell the public what we expect clearly. And it seems to me, if there's a disagreement in the HRB, that they should sit down with staff, go through some sessions and say, how do we tell the public what criteria we use?
Sure. One of the subjects that came up during our joint City Council HRB meeting, I guess this was in December, November, I believe it was.
Yeah.
One of the points that was made was that there are prescriptive criteria and there are subjective criteria. Example of prescriptive is, how's this building stand up during an earthquake? Very clear. It's all mathematics. When it comes to cultural measures, such as historic resources and the value a historic resource has on our local culture, that's hard to make that very prescriptive of here's the answer for all this. So therefore, that certainly becomes the challenge of the council. So.
Good. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Klein.
Martin, I had a few more questions for you.
Yes, Councilmember Klein.
Yeah, I'm sort of following up on Councilmember Schmidt's questions in some ways. Let me first start out by, I'm a little concerned that you talked earlier about how the interior should not be taken into account. And
it's not the mandate of the ordinance.
Yeah, I understand. But we had a third amendment to the motion at the HRB, I think made by Commissioner Kohler, that wanted to refer to Bill Bussey's ownership of this.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I didn't see any authorization for that. Do you know of any?
I believe it needs to be non-living persons. Mr.
So that was a mistake by the HRB to
well, I think it was just a comment, so, yeah.
I'm sorry?
I think, yeah, I remember Board Member Kohler making the reference to Mr. Bussey.
I think it's an amendment. It was the third amendment.
Okay, I'd have to look at the detail of that.
Yeah. Okay, so you would agree that consideration of, and I have to say that I've known Bill Bussey for years, and he's one of my favorite people, a great guy, but I don't think it's appropriate for you to have taken that into consideration.
I agree with you. I also know Mr. Bussey. He was my employer, and I know him quite well. I know he's an excellent basketball player, too. But I did not take that into consideration as a reason for significance of the project. So I was looking more at just the again what the photograph elicits. So.
Have you read the Page and Turnbull report?
We have not received the Page and Turnbull report.
You personally.
I have not personally received it. I've not reviewed it. I have no idea what it says. I mean, this the first words I've had, and that's why I think it's unfair for us to be able to make a recommendation to you if you're using some other report that we have not reviewed.
Okay. You've mentioned the plaque. Was that something that it sounded to me like that was of some significance to you?
Well, it was a suggestion that, I mean, this is not mandated by the ordinance of ownership pride, but I saw a plaque out there. It was just a comment, and and then today the plaque is gone. So,
well, you mentioned that in connection with the year that the house was built, which
1895.
Yeah, we all know that.
Yeah.
That seems to me to be saying that a house of that age just has to continue to have historical significance.
Only if it has enough historic character that has been retained. That's all. So.
Okay. Could you explain in sort of a very short statement, sort of Twitter length, but adopted to the City Council, which means 10 times longer, how it is that you and the architectural firm came to a different conclusion?
What I think one of the main aspects.
Excuse me, I should have said one more thing.
Yeah, sure.
It's not just the architectural firm; it's also the city staff member Dennis Backlund, who independently came to the same conclusion as the outside architects. From the historic resource evaluation, there was just a lot of reference to interior and the sides and the rear, and again, from the public's point of view, which is our main focus. We just didn't see those things to be applicable. And then there is one of the sentences in Garavaga's report. It says that the front-facing facade is intact, so which comports with our view. So. And lastly, and this gets back to I think to what Councilmember Schmid was asking. The Caravaggio firm has all the professional certifications.
that you're supposed to have to be in the business that they're in. And while I didn't try to review the background of each member of the HRB, is it fair to say that none of you have that professional certification?
I've provided such reports. Do I have the certification? I believe I have enough knowledge to prepare one, and I have prepared one. I don't know if I have the same. I have to look at his exact credentials to see if I have the same level of credentials.
Okay.
But I feel, as my scholarly pursuits have led me, I believe I can use the same language as he has used. So.
Thank you.
Councilmember Holman.
Thank you. I have a question or two for the applicant. Thank you. I'm always interested in when somebody applies for a change of designation and acknowledging that it doesn't happen that often. But I'm always interested when it does happen, what the owners investigated and knew when they purchased the property. So what did you know when you purchased the property? Because it was about 4 years ago, if I recall from reading the report. So what did you know then and what's changed?
It's about 4.5 years ago. We purchased the property mainly because it's close to our kids' school. It's close to the downtown. It's close to an educated area. It's close to a multicultural and multi-ethnic area. We didn't purchase it because it was historic or not historic. We found out that it was listed on the inventory when we redid one of the bathrooms in the first year that we bought the house. And that's when we found out.
So your realtor did not inform you the house was on the inventory and you had no knowledge of the fact it was on the inventory when you purchased the property?
I don't remember having knowledge. In fact, I remember thinking, hey, we're in the historic district of Professorville, and having somebody around that neighborhood inform me that, no, in fact, we were not. And I guess that was a big deal to them. I didn't know much about Palo Alto at the time. So that's all I knew.
Okay, and then question for staff. Thank you. Given that, well, this gets to be kind of sixes and sevens. Given that the ordinance is voluntary, and given that this is currently a Category 4 that's undergone significant changes, let's just suppose the house wasn't removed from the inventory. The likelihood of this, one could suppose, the likelihood of this home being crossing the threshold of a CEQA review or requiring a CEQA review seems to me quite low, it would seem to me. So I guess I'm looking at what would be the difference between it staying on, it's a different way of asking the question that Councilmember Shepherd asked earlier. What would be the difference of this house staying on the inventory if it would appear that it isn't going to be California Register eligible, given all the changes it's undergone as a Category 4? What difference does it make?
Thank you, Councilmember Holman. I think it could make a profound difference because I think and I certainly yield to our city attorney, but if someone were to challenge our action and basically say that this is a significant, even if we have a report that says it's not, if it's still on a list, I think there's some presumption there that it's a historic resource if the council hasn't removed it from that. And so I think there's definitely a risk that someone could challenge that, and that a court may say, city, it's on your list, it's a historic resource, you're removing it if you're demolishing it, so you have had a significant adverse impact on a historic resource, and therefore an environmental impact report is required, and you have to make overriding considerations to justify that. So I mean, we could certainly move forward without doing that, but I think we're at much more of a risk of that happening if it's still on the city's inventory than if it's not.
And I think, thank you for that. And then I think just to maybe get at some of the questions that have been asked of our board chair, typically when the HRB is reviewing and staff is reviewing, or are reviewing, alterations to an historic structure, how much of the impact is considered if the additions are to the rear of a house?
The additions typically to the rear of the house are less of importance than changes to the front of the house. If an applicant comes in and suggests that additions will be made to the back of the house that is not visible, typically there's less emphasis on the outcome of those additions versus ones that are seen from the public right-of-way. So although we do look at the house as a whole in terms of primary viewpoints, it's usually the side of the house that faces the public right-of-way.
I think my other points are comments rather than questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Espinoza.
My questions have really already been asked by Councilmember Schmidt and Klein, save one, which I wanted to just get clarity on. The consideration that was given by staff or others to provide the peer review report to both the HRB or to others involved, was that just a matter of timing when that was done? And just wanted to make sure I understood why that had not been shared with the HRB, and if there had been consideration that there were any significant findings in that report that necessitated going back to the HRB for review before coming to council.
Yeah, the peer review report prepared by Page and Turnbull was submitted in its final form in early this month, January 3rd. The HRB had made their recommendation to council on September 21st, so it was well after the HRB's recommendation. They've taken their action, and staff felt that even if we provided the report to the HRB members, they could not comment in any official capacity unless we brought the project back to the HRB itself. The HRB took their action, and we felt probably the most appropriate direction after that was to bring it to council for your review.
Let me ask that question in a different way, if I may. It would seem to me that some might conclude that with new information, HRB consideration would be justified, and I wonder if in the peer review report you find that there's any compelling new information or rationale that would make sense for the council to send this back to HRB for further review.
Yes, sorry for that understanding. Councilmember Espinoza, we didn't. Our feeling was that substantively it was finding the same thing. We didn't request that an additional peer review be provided. We were satisfied with the original report and on a track to move this forward to you. But the document from Page and Turnbull very much just substantiated the prior report and didn't seem necessary to require additional review by HRB.
Thank you. I'd just say in closing that I did meet with the applicant and with the chair of the HRB, but didn't gain any information that hasn't been shared this evening.
Vice Mayor Scharf.
Thank you very much. When the property was first, Curtis, when the property was first put on the historic list in 76, I guess, no, 78, we believe it was historic, right? We don't think it was a mistake. Is that fair?
No, the city at that time felt it was a historic building.
And then the primary reason is the 2005 remodel that it's lost its integrity. Was I correct in taking that out of the
I think according to the report, it wasn't just the 2005 remodel, but I think it was the addition of all of the remodels since.
What was the process into the 2005 remodel? That wasn't that long ago. Did that go to HRB at the time, or how did this occur that it lost integrity? And that I'm sort of curious about the process.
Couldn't comment on when exactly the structure lost its integrity. However, the changes that were proposed in 2005 were more ministerial and therefore not discretionary and didn't require HRB review. They fell into the ministerial building permit category.
Are there any issues about historic homes that are, Category 4 or whatever? Do we have the right process here? I guess that's what I'm getting at, where we don't, lose things on a ministerial basis. Because, that's what seems to be cited as the 2005. I realize it's an accumulation, but there's a lot made of the 2005 remodel. So I'm really just wondering if staff wants to comment, and maybe even the HRB, on if there are any process issues here that are concerns in their minds.
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor Scharf. I think that it's the structure of our ordinance at this point, and it is one that takes some level of change. And these are a series of sort of minor changes that have added up to a fairly significant change over time. But each individual one was not significant, and our ordinance really for Category 3 and 4 is not highly stringent. I think to make it, more restrictive would, be a fairly significant process to go through and public review and such. But there is a very strong difference between Category 1 and 2 and Category 3 and 4 in terms of the level of what triggers HRB getting involved and what triggers any discretion on the part of the staff or HRB.
And one of the things that struck me about the HRB presentation was that they said the focus was on the public presence of the street, because that's what they believe council direction was. We don't have that in any ordinance, right? That's an unspoken or not spelled out approach.
That's correct. It would be part of the historic review report as to which sides were affected. I think that's to some extent, as Stephen was saying, what dictates on, say, a 3 or 4, whether we bring it to HRB or not, is if that highly visible presence is altered significantly.
And when we look at the what's it, 7 it's 7, what do we call it, the 7 historical features or something like that.
7 aspects of
the 7
integrity.
Aspects. I assume, and I guess I just need to know if I'm right, that a local ordinance, the way you look at that, can modify that. For instance, if you had one of the aspects was that the focus was on the public presence of a street, you could do that and then you'd have a different analysis that would take place. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And so I guess what I took out of this was that the HRB looked at the public presence and looked at that as the primary. And so I wanted to ask the consultant, if that had been in the ordinance, that the public presence was, the primary part of that makes the structure historic from the streetscape, would that have changed your review of whether or not this was a Category 4 home?
Yes, I think that might have been a part that we would have considered much more. But I did review the ordinance and didn't see anything about valuing the primary facade more than the rest. And it's a typical practice of ours that when we're evaluating a building that's listed individually, especially because it's significant for its architecture and not because of a related person or event or something like that, that the whole building as one entity is looked at carefully.
So if we had that in our ordinance, do you think that you would have come to a different conclusion then? Is that what I heard you say? Or?
Yes, it's possible.
Okay. I'd like to move that we, we have more.
Sorry. The city attorney has just reminded me that this is a quasi-judicial item before the city council, and as part of our council protocols, we encourage that if there are any disclosures that colleagues would like to make, that that you do so before we actually take a vote on this item. Councilmember Burt.
Well, that was one of my questions, so I would like to disclose that I met with the applicant a couple of months ago and did not receive materials other than those that are in our before us tonight. And I did have one question. It's kind of a follow-up on Councilmember Scharf's questions on when different events occurred. I'm a little confused, but it may make sense. It says that in early 1980, the council adopted the historic inventory, and I think it was based on an inventory, historic survey that was conducted in 78 and 79, and that this property, at the time of the designation, a substantial remodeling project had been approved in 1977 by the city. Does that mean it was approved and had not been constructed at the time of the historic survey? Is that the implication?
Yes, Councilmember Byrd, I believe that is.
So this one has a little bit of it. Now, and I guess I should ask, do we know how significant that remodel was and to what degree it affects the staff's current judgment that this would not be a Class 4 structure?
Councilmember Burt, in Garavalia's report on page 7, there's a construction chronology that describes the changes to the structure since approximately the date it was built. And so, so on page 7 of the Garavaglia report, there's a construction chronology table that describes the different modifications taking place to the building since it was essentially constructed. The projects that took place around 1977 or so indicate that William and Barbara Bousset officially combined the building lots into the current property. At that time, the rear porch appears to have been enclosed with additional porch to the north. So that looks like the project that was, I guess, in process during the historic survey.
Okay, and so it's kind of hard to tell exactly which of the changes affected it to the point where it's viewed today the way it has been. I'll just note that this particular project parcel and home may be somewhat of an anomaly, that it had a approval for changes that were somewhat significant that were approved right before the inventory, and the changes were permissible without any additional approval after the inventory was adopted, or maybe the change had already happened in between those two periods. So I think it goes back to questions on whether we do need to look at any process changes, but I do think that this project has that anomalous characteristic.
I know that we've gone through a full round of comments by colleagues, and I saw some lights just related to disclosure, I believe. So, Councilmember Klein.
No, I just wanted to say that since this is a quasi-judicial hearing, that I did meet with the applicant several months ago, as Councilmember Burt probably met around the same time, and I also did not receive anything at that time that we don't have right before us tonight.
Before I turn to the public speakers, I also wanted to disclose I did meet with the applicant several months ago. I had received several of the consultants' reports that are ultimately in public record, and I know that I did not receive any additional information that wasn't publicly available. I think the questions is that I wanted to raise, one comment that the consultant from Page and Turnbull had mentioned was just that the interior of home would be considered if it were part of the application documentation to actually become part of the historic registry. And I wanted to just ask if, who keeps that? Once, if this is such an old document that when it first got into the historical inventory, who's the keeper of that original documentation so that we're even aware of whether or not it's part of, was part of the consideration or not?
So you're as far as how a house was designated or structure was designated initially, there are records back to that. They aren't, I wouldn't say it was like our parcel report where we can punch up and get the zoning, and we get the designation, but we don't get that background information. So it's back there, but we'd have to go through, the microfilm on a file to find out if it was that long ago. If it was something more recent, then would more likely have better access and quicker access to it. But there are a lot of files that categorized all the, did all the surveying that was done for the historic ordinance and documents that, and occasionally we do go back and look at, what was the basis for something being designated. But again, it's, there's a lot of paper back there. We've got hundreds of properties involved.
I think just the reason I ask it is if, even assuming there's any, any look at any time at the ordinance, since the focus is on the external characteristics, if and this is a broader point, just if there were a review of any internal modifications, for me, it just comes down to the documentation. And if that's something that's not necessarily readily available, then it's even a difficult standard to maintain and enforce. So that's ultimately where I think I understand why the HRB focused on the external characteristics. I understand if that's the ordinance's focus, then the HRB was just carrying out its kind of designated job. And because of that, then some of this more comprehensive analysis from my perspective that both consultants did, it's just a different set of review. It's a different type of review. And I understand then why there's a difference in the conclusion from the consultants. So it's just something where I don't know if tonight there's a solution for that kind of broader disconnect between consultants' review versus HRB review. Yes.
Yes, thank you for that, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify, though, that both consultants' review was not based on interior changes. It's based on external changes. And
Yeah.
they commented on the interior, correct, but that wasn't the basis for their determination.
I agree. Thanks for the clarification. Okay, so with that, let me turn to the public speakers. We have 4. You'll be provided 3 minutes to make your comments. You'll see the green light when you're just prompted to start, and then once you reach 1 minute, you'll see the yellow light, and then once your time runs out, you'll see the red light, and you'll hear an incessant beeping. So the first speaker is Michael Hodos, followed by David Yen.
My name is Michael Hodos. Chris and I are back fence neighbors. But to give you a little context, the Bussies, the Wilkersons, ourselves, and a family named
Sir, if you can speak a little closer to the
sorry.
microphone. Yeah, thank you.
There were 4 families that bought 2 pieces of property adjacent to each other back in 1978 together. We all moved in at the same time. In fact, the first thing we did was take down all the fences so we could, we had for many years a contiguous backyard, and we helped each other restore and renovate the properties over a period of time. So, and the Bussies and the Wilkersons owned that house in partnership for many, many years. As Chris and I talked across the back fence, what fascinated me when I asked him how it was going from time to time was that he mentioned that the HRB had based its decision on the facade of the building, because much of what you see there was done by Bill Bussey after 1978. Those brackets above the front window were done by Bill. They weren't there when the house was purchased. The railing on the stairs was done by Bill. You can't see it, but the tree behind the car, behind that there's a set of French doors that look out on the porch. Those were done by Bill. That wasn't part of the original building. And on the right-hand side of the building, there's a bay window that was put in, small bay, and that was done subsequently. In fact, it was done many years later. So the primary architectural pieces that catch your eye on that building were all done way after the building was ever built. And the architect slash contractor that bought the building and renovated it and then sold it to the Picketts, he put the front door in. That front door wasn't there either back in the beginning. Now, Bill kept as many of the architectural elements as he could because he was an architect, and as Larry and a lot of other people would tell you, Councilman Klein would tell you, that was his bent. His father was a carpenter, and so was his grandfather. But he enhanced the building significantly over the time that he and Barbara lived there, and the Wilkersons lived there. And I just thought that that might be something you might want to consider when you make a decision this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is David Yen, to be followed by Justin Chue.
Thank you, Mayor and council members.
I've known the Picketts for, my name is David Yan. I've known the Picketts for many years now. Our kids started in kindergarten together, so I know them to be really good people. I'm familiar with the discussions going on. I've read the memo that they sent to you, and it appears like the outside consultant came to a very different conclusion than the HRB. And it's unfortunate that happened, but I would urge you to allow them to remove the house from the historic record. And perhaps this is a chance for you to clarify the process that the HRB uses to determine whether a house, not whether a house goes onto the historic record inventory, but how to take one off and what criteria they should use for that. Because it appears that that's where a lot of the confusion was in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin Choi, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, and to be followed by our last speaker, Avachai Taijasanant.
Hi, my name is Justin Chu, and thank you, council members, for letting me speak. Yeah, I'm an 18-year resident of Palo Alto, and been a friend of the Picketts for many years. And my comment mainly is that my family has also gone through the planning department, and we rebuilt in Palo Alto. There's a long process. It's extensive, and the Picketts seem to have followed this process, and at great time and expense. And they've gotten the outside consultants, and they've gotten the approval of them. And while there may be discrepancies in the process, they went through it. And so I would just encourage you to vote for approval of their request to remove the historical designation for their home. Thank you.
And our last speaker, Avachai Taijasanant.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Avachai Taijasanant, and I'm a Palo Alto resident as well. I've been fortunate to be friends with Rebecca and Chris for the past 7 years, I believe, or more. And I've known them even before they moved into Palo Alto. What strikes me about this particular issue is that, first of all, Chris and Rebecca are genuinely interested in the welfare of the family, and the process of having their house, I guess, changed to fit their lifestyle is an important component of their future. So going through this process, I know Chris and Rebecca have spent considerable time and effort and resources to fulfill the process. And I believe the process has been adequately and significantly completed, and I believe the conclusion is pretty clear. So I urge the City Council to take the 935 Ramona House off the historic register. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That was our last public speaker. At this point in the public hearing, we give the applicant 3 minutes to make any concluding remarks, or just, we technically call it a rebuttal, but you can respond to or provide any last comments. You're given 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I'll need 3 minutes, hopefully. I think what I want to say is I want to address something Councilman Holman asked. What's the effect of just leaving it on? Well, the inventory should mean something. That's the effect. If you leave it on and it's not historically significant, then the inventory means nothing. We have tried our very best to follow the process as it's been laid out. We've gone, as you've heard, to get expert reports from 2 experts that are recommended by the city as experts for historic preservation. I think they know what they're talking about. I don't really know because I'm not an expert in that, but they're recommended by their city for that, by this city for that. I believe it is a case of first impression for this HRB. I don't think that they have dealt with this particular issue before. I think they try to do their best. I think pretty clearly that they used the wrong standards. They didn't use the standards for integrity. They used the standards for rehabilitation. There's a difference. We've done our best to follow the process that's outlined by Palo Alto. And we would ask that this council vote tonight to take our house off the inventory, because as I started in my presentation, our house lacks the sufficient historical integrity to be on the inventory. And that should mean something. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. At this time, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to council for any additional comments, questions, or motions. Vice Mayor Scharf.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Great. It's been moved by Vice Mayor Scharf and seconded by Councilmember Klein. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I would. I do believe the Pickett family has followed the rules. I mean, I think, as he said, 2 outside, consultant reports that were recommended by the city came to that conclusion. I'm sympathetic to the HRB's concern, especially regarding the public presence, but that's not in our ordinance, so to speak. And if it was in the ordinance, then maybe the consultant indicated they would have come to a different agreement, but that's not our rule. And I think we have to have an open and transparent process in which we follow the rules. And I think the Pickett family has followed the rules, and I think that that's the conclusion we should go with, is staff's recommendation.
Councilmember Klein, would you like to speak to your second?
Yes. We've had not just 2 experts, 2 outside experts, but our own internal expert, Dennis Backlund, came to the same conclusion, that this should be removed from the historic inventory. Being on the historic inventory is not a blessing. For some people it is, who are very proud of their historic houses, and that's great. But for others it's a burden. We have one estimate in the record that similar houses that are on the historical inventory are worth on the market 10 to 15% less than a similar house that's not on the inventory. And the reason for that may be many, but certainly one is that was alluded to in the dialogue between Councilmember Holman and Curtis Williams, that when you're on the historic inventory, you are subject to potential environmental review, which we all know those are only 2 words and it doesn't seem like very much, but it can translate into lots of time and money, as we saw in the last historic house situation we had a year or so ago. And we shouldn't be putting people through that process unless there is a good and sufficient record to justify the house being on the historic inventory. And I think clearly now, for this particular house, there isn't. We've had the 2 outside experts who are professionally qualified. We have our own internal examiner of this, also professionally qualified. And with all due respect to the Historic Resources Board, they're not composed of experts. Now, that doesn't mean that we always accept the words of experts. These experts can be wrong, but I don't think they are in this case. The litany of changes to this house over time is extensive, and so it's not surprising that we've ended up with a reduction of its historical integrity. And I'd also like to point out that our voters, the public, 12 years ago I think it was, told the city that we should not be having a historic resource ordinance that was too restrictive, that the one that we had in place at the time was too restrictive, and the voters turned that down. Now, that doesn't get to this issue, but it, I think, provides some background. And in brief, I think the background here is that we have citizens who went through the process. They did it twice. The testimony or the reports of their experts, I think, are persuasive, and that we ought to thus adopt the removal from the inventory for this house.
Councilmember Holman.
There haven't been very many occasions where I recall this chamber as being this quiet. It's exceedingly quiet. Well, I have several comments. One of them is I think it's troubling that the applicant didn't know that their house was listed on the inventory when they purchased it. That's a bit troubling. I think it's also important to recognize that there were, when we went through, Councilmember Klein referenced the election that was several years ago. And there was a lot of misinformation at that time. And I think one piece that, or two pieces hopefully that we can get cleared up tonight, hopefully for good, is that just because a building is old doesn't mean it's historic. That's just a fact. The staff report clearly states that for a building to be historic, it has to satisfy criteria and has to have its historic integrity. So hopefully we can put that to bed. Another thing I hope we can put to bed is that single-family homes in single-family use, the ordinance does not concern itself with interior alterations. Only exception to that, as noted by staff, is if there's something in the listing that notes something in particular of the interior. So I hope we can put that to bed, and I hope the media picks this up so we can really get this out of people's thinking once and for all. It's been languishing for far too long. Another thing is that we do have the categories 1 through 4, and you know, when it was done in its time, it probably served its purpose, but it is interesting when you go around and look at what some of the category 4s are. They have quite high character, historic character, and we have, people have told us who are experts, told us that we have category 3s and 4s that are eligible for California and maybe even National Register. So I hope we can find a way in the not too distant future to find a more consistent way to approach our historic buildings that's more fair to the public and more fair to our resources as well. As you know, those resources are one of the many things that characterize what our community is, what it's been known for and what it is. I also agree with Mr. Pickett that being on the inventory should mean something. I agree with you 100%. I needed to ask the question so he'd be clear on what, you know, it would mean to stay on the inventory. I think the 6 criteria for designation that's in the staff report on page 3 of 8 are pretty clear. And I think the changes listed on page 5 of 8, and actually then that are referenced again on page 6 of 8 of the staff report, are what sway me. My experience is that while you consider the whole building, what happens at the rear of a building is less impactful and of less import. So that's not as swaying to me as a couple of other things. The additions and changes that have happened over time, which is also another thing that I hope we learn and kind of ingrain in our thinking, that change is cumulative. Whether it's traffic or whether it's changes to an historic resource, change is cumulative and has an effect. So for me, the substantial redesign of the original roof and the additions that change the form quite significantly, and to me, again, from the street, it's not just the full-on view, as you see here, but also the oblique view, which is quite prominent from the street, really demonstrate to me that the building has gone through really large and significant changes that really do diminish greatly its historic integrity. The other thing that I'd like to put forth is that retention of historic buildings, or even just older buildings, is not just an issue of historic preservation, it's an issue of conservation. And as our community looks at being green, we need to a greater extent, consider building retention and adaptive reuse. When you tear down a building, there's a lot of energy that is embodied in the existing building, a lot of energy that is consumed in recycling, salvaging, and transporting those materials and manufacturing new materials. The cycle goes on and on and on. So I hope that the Picketts will consider adaptive reuse in addition to this building, and consider the environmental impacts to doing otherwise. It's especially difficult to see a building like this go away when it's had such significant upgrades accomplished at site. So that's also really a strong consideration. I hope that will be a part of the thinking as the Picketts go forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Price.
Thank you. I will be supporting this motion for many of the same reasons that have already been stated. It seems to me that a key issue here is the integrity question and the architectural integrity of the building. And with the documentation that we have in front of us, I think the very fine work of the staff and the fine work done by the two consultants, I'm persuaded these were very compelling arguments. I was impressed with the thoroughness of the examination and the evaluation. I know that both Garavaglia and Page and Turnbull as firms are highly regarded by architectural historians and historic preservationists. They have a long record, both firms, of doing very compelling and very academic and thoughtful work. I felt that, again, the documentation suggests that over time, the original Queen Anne cottage style, this particular architectural motif has been significantly eroded with modifications and significant modifications and alterations. And for those reasons, I will be supporting the staff recommendation and the motion before us. I would like to thank the HRB for their very thoughtful work. And in fairness to the HRB, they do not have additional resources at their disposal to do additional significant, additional academic and other work. They very much rely on their own expertise and professional training and the work of the staff. So I think we need to be careful regarding how we characterize their efforts. I think that all of our commissions work hard to be very thorough and very thoughtful in their work. And I think the applicant was very respectful in that regard, but I do think we have to remind ourselves that all of the volunteers that work on behalf of the city devote a huge amount of energy and time and expertise in their deliberations. Thank you.
Councilmember Espinoza.
I'm trying to think of what I have to add. I'll associate myself with the comments that have already been made. I'll just say quickly, I did live around the corner from this house for many years and lived in a home that went through a historic rehabilitation, and have watched many homes in this area go through similar restoration or rehabilitation projects. And, you know, in my heart, I wish we could convince people to not tear down old homes, because I love them and I love being able to walk by and see homes that look like this. But you know, I'm even a stronger believer in property rights and in the processes that we've developed in the city, and independent analysis and peer reviews and standards and so forth. And I too very much respect the work and the expertise of the HRB, and I very much value their opinion. There are so many different projects where their thoughtful and very considered expertise has proven so well in our conclusions as a city. But I think in this case we have several reports that we're able to provide even more in-depth analysis and further research. For the other reasons that have been stated this evening, I also will be supporting the motion as stated. I think that the case has been made that this should not be on the registry. Thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Well, first off, thank you for all the hard work, and I'm sorry for having to go through two, historic reviews by experts, but I guess I will be supporting the motion. clearly this is a house that has been remodeled without any review of its historic features throughout many generations of different people living here. When I look on page 20 of the Garviani, thank you, I'll get used to that, report, you know, it's clear that a big segment of the house is quite noticeable from the street, and it looks, this particular part of the house really is clearly remodeled without necessarily having the type of review that would keep the integrity. And so, as sad as I think this is to remove something from the inventory, I'm more concerned actually about the pathway for how this lost its integrity and how the HRB really is out of the loop in some of our categorical homes, especially as Councilmember Holman points out, some of them have some really good integrity, and throughout different remodels they might be able to lose that and then fall into this particular predicament. And so I'd like to see maybe HRB address that so that we can be a little clearer as we go along with I think the intention for Palo Alto having done this is to keep this this flavor of the community, this feeling, like they talk about in their report, the feeling of history in the streets of Palo Alto. I also am a little concerned about the motion made by HRB, and I was wondering if staff could maybe coach them a little bit when they're going so, you know, 6-0 against what the historian has and the staff has recommended. If there's a way you can step them through the process of the 7 processes so that we can see where it failed for HRB and then talk in that particular segment of the failure as opposed to trying to figure that out ourselves through reading the minutes and the motion. I'm hoping that maybe staff can do that so that there will be a better flow and consistency coming to council when these recommendations come to us. Thank you.
Councilmember Schmid.
I'll be supporting the motion. I think take history very seriously. I think it's an important part of the soul of a community, and it's, you know, where a lot of us grow up and learn from the environment we live in. But I'm baffled by one part of, you know, what we tell the community about history. About 4 or 5 weeks ago, I came across a staff report dealing with the Fairchild building. It's a building over on Charleston, where Silicon Valley was invented. It's probably the most important historical site in Silicon Valley, certainly in Palo Alto. And the staff report said, its status and history do not protect the building from demolition. It is not on the Palo Alto Historical Resources Inventory. And I'm baffled that we have 500 buildings on the inventory, but the most important historical building in town isn't. And I guess I can see in the discussion tonight, I mean, really we're talking about architectural history. The consultant firms that we have on our list are architectural historians. And our discussion tonight, the Historical Review Board is looking at architectural history. And just a comment, I think it will be important if we want to get the people of Palo Alto to support our notion of history and what history means to us. We ought to be able to widen the scope a little bit of what our historical inventory is and what is on it. So I just wanted to add that as a comment.
Seeing no other lights, I just wanted to ask colleagues to please vote. And the motion passes unanimously 9-0. Thank you, everyone, for coming out for this item. I know that we had multiple people involved, so thanks for your patience and working through the item together. Moving on to, that was our last action item. Our next section in the agenda is council member questions, comments, and announcements. Councilmember Shepherd.
I wanted to just report that the school district tomorrow will be going over demographics about what their projections will be for enrollment over the next 5 years. And I thought it was a great outreach that Barbara Klausner, Trustee Klausner, called me to find out what our information was so that she could be prepared with good questions. They have a new demographer. And I have explained in our last City School Liaison Committee meeting that the most recent report that Curtis brought to us, along with the ABAG committee, and I know we have a different name for that committee, was really the most helpful in being able to understand what the process we're going through for trying to validate bringing in these housing numbers and allocations from ABAG, and to read through that. So they were planning on reading through that, but they are interested in asking hard questions because they know that what their decisions are tomorrow might feed into some of their Coverly discussions about it, when and how they might need to open that. So,
Thank you. Councilmember Price.
Thank you. I am now an alternate to the VTA Board of Directors representing the Northwest Grouping, and I've been assigned representing VTA to 2 other groups, Joint Powers Board, the I-680 Sonal Smart Carpool Lanes. It meets in Oakland. And the second one is the Policy Advisory Board, the Dumbarton Rail Policy Advisory Board. I'll be serving with Margaret Abe-Koga, council member from Mountain View. At the recent VTA meeting, there was a discussion of express bus service, effective. The early rollout is today. In fact, I saw one of these buses today on Oregon Expressway. These are 20 new diesel-electric hybrid buses, and they're specifically designed for use as part of the VTA Express service. At the board meeting, there was a discussion of various service changes, an announcement of a vigorous marketing and communication plan, which is to ensure that VTA users, passengers, potential passengers, and the community at large are aware of the service changes that are taking place. Express lane update, US 101 and State Route 85. They will be converting carpool lanes to express lane operations where feasible within the alignment to express lanes, and the purpose of this is to address congestion relief and to provide operational benefits. And I will give additional information on express lane updates as they occur.
Great, thank you, and congratulations on the new role. Councilmember Schmid.
Just to follow up Councilmember Shepherd's comment, I guess we do have guiding principles for the Coverly discussion on our agenda, but I have not seen that listed as yet. I assume it's coming soon.
Councilmember Holman. All right, with that, with no more lights from colleagues, we'll proceed to closed session. Before the council moves into closed session, we do have one public speaker, Herb Borak.
Thank you, Mayor Ye, and good evening, council members. 2 months ago, the Superior Court in Sacramento made a decision on this case, and so I thought today might have been the last day on deciding whether to make an appeal. Since that time, the council's taken a position that the project should be terminated, and so I think it's a stronger position that there doesn't seem to be anything in common with the authority board, and there's no reason to come to any agreement with them. On the question of whether pursuing the case to the appellate level, I know that the Rail Authority Board last month discussed it in closed session. One of the issues that has come up where the court disagreed with the city and the other petitioners was on the issue of the ridership study. I agree with all the comments that we've heard and the analysis that have been done, that the ridership study is terrible and it should be done better. But in the decision that was made, it was on environmental law, and there the lead agency has great discretion on deciding what ridership study it wants to use. And so I think the court made the correct decision in that case. But I also believe the court made the correct decision where it ruled in favor of the city. So I don't see why it's necessary to have anything to be discussing in closed session, but look forward to hearing what you do. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And council will now proceed into closed session.